The moment Eleanor Vale stepped off that stagecoach in Black Hollow, Wyoming, the entire town erupted in laughter. She was supposed to be a mail-order bride, delicate, grateful, small. Instead, she was tall, broad-shouldered, and looked like she could throw a hay bale farther than most of the men watching. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was when her future husband, rancher Caleb Boone, just stood there. Silent, frozen. 3 seconds that told her everything she needed to know about the man who'd sent for her. This is the story of what happened when a woman everyone underestimated decided she was done being invisible. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The stagecoach door swung open, and Eleanor Vale looked down at the dusty street of Black Hollow like a woman staring at the gallows. She'd known this moment would come. Known it for 6 weeks, ever since she'd signed the contract with Caleb Boone, rancher, widower, desperate enough to advertise for a wife in a Philadelphia newspaper. She'd read his letter 3 times before responding. Short, functional, no poetry, no promises. Just a man who needed help and a woman who needed to disappear. Philadelphia hadn't been kind to Eleanor. Not the boarding house where the landlady called her sturdy with a wrinkled nose. Not the dress shop where they told her she'd never fit their inventory. Not the gentleman caller who'd taken one look at her in the parlor and excused himself to use the washroom, then left through the back door. Eleanor was 28, unmarried, 6 feet tall in her stockings, broad across the shoulders from years hauling her mother's laundry baskets before the fever took her. She had good teeth, a sharp mind, and absolutely no illusions about what the world thought of women like her. So when Caleb Boone's letter arrived, she hadn't hesitated. She'd packed her trunk, sold her mother's wedding ring, and bought a one-way ticket west. Now, standing in the coach doorway with the Wyoming sun beating down and 24 faces staring up at her, Eleanor felt her stomach twist. They were already laughing. Not loud, not yet. But she could see it in their eyes, the widening, the quick glances to their neighbors, the mouths twitching at the corners. A man near the front hawked and spat into the dirt. "Hell, Boone, you order a wife or a lumberjack?" The laughter spread. Eleanor's hands tightened on the doorframe. She'd promised herself she wouldn't react, wouldn't flinch, wouldn't give them the satisfaction. But then her eyes found him. Caleb Boone stood apart from the crowd, hat in his hands, dust on his boots. He was tall, taller than she'd expected, with dark hair going gray at the temples and a face carved from hard years and harder choices. His jaw was set. His shoulders were straight, and he wasn't laughing. But he wasn't defending her either. He just stood there, silent, staring. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. Eleanor felt something crack inside her chest. She'd prepared herself for cruelty, for mockery, even for rejection. But somehow this was worse. This paralysis, this visible effort it took him just to keep his face neutral while his town tore her apart. A woman in a blue bonnet leaned toward her companion. Poor man probably thought he was getting something pretty. Eleanor stepped down from the coach. The driver handed down her trunk without meeting her eyes. She took it, lifted it herself because no one offered to help, and set it on the ground with a solid thud that shut up half the crowd. Then she turned and looked directly at Caleb Boone. "Mr. Boone." Her voice came out steady. That was something. He flinched like she'd slapped him. Then he seemed to remember himself. He crossed the distance between them in 4 long strides, stopped 2 feet away, and cleared his throat. "Miss Vale." Up close she could see the lines around his eyes, the sunburn on his neck, the way his hands kept flexing at his sides like he didn't know what to do with them. "The wagon's just there," he said, nodding toward a buckboard hitched to 2 tired-looking horses. "If you're ready." If she was ready. Like she had a choice. Like there was anywhere else in this godless town she could go. "I'm ready," Eleanor said. She picked up her trunk again, felt the weight of it pull at her shoulders, and carried it to the wagon herself. Behind her, someone whispered, "Least she's strong enough to pull a plow." More laughter. Eleanor didn't turn around. She heaved the trunk into the wagon bed, climbed up onto the seat, and folded her hands in her lap. Caleb stood beside the wagon for a moment, looking at the ground. Then he climbed up beside her, took the reins, and clicked his tongue at the horses. They rolled out of town in silence. The ranch was 7 miles north, and Caleb Boone didn't say a single word the entire ride. Eleanor didn't either. She kept her eyes on the horizon, on the endless brown hills that stretched out like a held breath, The sky so wide it made her feel small in a way Philadelphia never had. The sun was brutal. The wind was dry. Everything smelled like dust and dying grass. Halfway to the ranch, they passed a creek bed that was nothing but cracked mud and rocks. "Drought," Caleb said suddenly, like the word had been dragged out of him. Eleanor looked at him. He didn't look back, just kept his eyes on the road. 3 months now, he continued. Worst I've seen. Wells are running dry, creek's gone, river's down to nothing. He paused. Makes things hard. Eleanor waited for him to say more. He didn't. She turned back to the horizon. Another mile passed. I'm sorry, Caleb said quietly. Eleanor's head snapped toward him. For what? He still wouldn't look at her. His jaw worked like he was chewing on broken glass. He stopped. Started again. For the town. They shouldn't have, but they did, Eleanor said flatly. Caleb's hands tightened on the reins. And you didn't stop them, Eleanor added. That got his attention. He turned to look at her, and for the first time she saw something other than carefully controlled nothing in his face. Shame. Anger. Maybe both. I didn't know what to say, he said. You could have said anything. I'm not good with words. You don't need words to tell a room full of people to shut their mouths. Caleb's jaw tightened. You're right. Eleanor blinked. She hadn't expected that. You're right, Caleb said again. I should have... He exhaled hard through his nose. I froze. And I'm sorry. Eleanor studied him. His profile, the tension in his shoulders, the way his knuckles had gone white on the reins. He meant it. That was the worst part. He actually meant it, but meaning it didn't erase what had happened. Thank you for the apology, Eleanor said carefully, but it doesn't change the fact that I just rode into a town that thinks I'm a joke, with a husband who couldn't be bothered to defend me. I'm not your husband yet, Caleb said quietly. Eleanor's stomach dropped. What? We're not married yet, Caleb clarified. He glanced at her, then away. I thought the contract said we'd have a week. To make sure. Before we went to the preacher. Oh, that was smart. That was careful. That was a man leaving himself an escape route in case the merchandise didn't meet expectations. Eleanor's hands curled into fists in her lap. I see, she said. It's not, Caleb started. It's fine. Eleanor cut him off. Her voice was ice. You're being practical. I understand. Eleanor. Miss Vale, she corrected. Caleb's mouth snapped shut. They didn't speak again until the ranch came into view. Caleb Boone's ranch was dying. Eleanor could see it the moment they crested the last hill. The house was a low, weathered structure that sagged on one side like a broken rib. The barn was missing half its roof. The fences were patched with rope and prayer, and the fields, what should have been fields, were just acres of cracked earth and dead grass baking under the merciless sun. 2 men stood near the barn, watching the wagon approach. Caleb pulled the horses to a stop in front of the house and climbed down without offering Eleanor a hand. She climbed down herself. Walter, Caleb called to the older of the 2 men. This is Miss Vale. She'll be staying in the house. Walter was 60 if he was a day, with a face like dried leather and eyes that didn't miss much. He looked Eleanor up and down once, nodded, and went back to hammering at a fence post. The younger man, barely 20, with red hair and a sunburned nose, stared openly. Miss Vale, Caleb said, turning to her. That's Walter Pike. He's been with the ranch 15 years, and that's Tommy Ross. He's new. Tommy jerked his head in a nod, still staring. Eleanor nodded back. An awkward silence settled over the yard. I'll show you the house, Caleb said finally. He grabbed her trunk from the wagon and carried it toward the front door. Eleanor followed. The inside of the house was... She searched for a kind word and came up empty. Small. Dark. Hot. The main room served as kitchen, dining area, and sitting room all at once. There was a wood stove that looked older than Walter, a table with 2 mismatched chairs, and a shelf full of dented tin plates. Your room's through there, Caleb said, nodding toward a narrow door on the left. I'm on the other side. Walter and Tommy sleep in the barn. Eleanor looked at the door, looked at him. It's got a lock, Caleb added quickly. On your side. Of course it did. Eleanor walked to the door, pushed it open, and found a room barely big enough for the narrow bed and dresser crammed inside. There was a window with no curtain, a hook on the wall for hanging clothes, nothing else. Caleb set her trunk down just inside the doorway. I know it's not... He stopped. It's not much. Eleanor turned to face him. Mr. Boone, I didn't come here expecting luxury. I came here expecting honesty. Something flickered across his face. You'll get that. Will I? They stared at each other. I'll let you settle in, Caleb said finally. He backed toward the door. Supper's at 6, nothing fancy. He left before she could respond. Eleanor stood in the tiny, stifling room and listened to his boots cross the main room. The front door opened, closed. Then silence. She sat down on the bed. It creaked. The mattress was thin and lumpy. The pillow smelled like dust. Eleanor put her face in her hands and allowed herself exactly 30 seconds to feel the full weight of what she'd done. She'd left Philadelphia. Left everything she knew. Traveled 2,000 miles to marry a man who couldn't look at her in front of his town. To live in a house that was falling apart. On a ranch that was dying. 30 seconds. Then Eleanor lifted her head, wiped her eyes, and started unpacking. Supper was beans, cornbread, and coffee strong enough to strip paint. Caleb cooked it himself while Eleanor sat at the table and watched. He moved around the small kitchen with the efficiency of a man who'd been doing this alone for a long time. No wasted motion, no conversation. Walter came in just as Caleb was dishing up the plates. He nodded to Eleanor, sat down, and started eating without a word. Tommy hovered in the doorway like he wasn't sure if he was allowed inside. Sit, Caleb said. Tommy sat. They ate in silence. The beans were under-seasoned, the cornbread was dry, but Eleanor was hungry enough not to care. She cleaned her plate and reached for the coffee pot to refill her cup. Walter watched her over the rim of his own cup. You know how to cook? He asked suddenly. Eleanor set the pot down. Yes. Good, Walter said. Caleb burns everything. Caleb's fork paused halfway to his mouth. I don't burn everything. You burned the chicken last week. That was once. You burned the potatoes yesterday. Those weren't burned, they were crispy. They were black. Tommy made a noise that might have been a laugh, then tried to turn it into a cough when Caleb glared at him. Eleanor felt the corner of her mouth twitch. Walter caught it. His eyes narrowed, not unkindly. You find that funny, Miss Vale? I find it informative, Eleanor said carefully. She's polite, Walter said to Caleb. That's something. Caleb's jaw tightened. Walter, what? I'm just saying she could have shown up rude and useless. Instead, she's polite and... He looked at Eleanor. What are you good at besides cooking? Eleanor considered the question. Numbers, organization, I can read and write. I managed the boarding house accounts in Philadelphia for 2 years before the landlady sold the building. Walter's eyebrows went up. You're good with numbers? Yes. He looked at Caleb. You hear that? She's good with numbers. I heard, Caleb said tightly. When's the last time you looked at the ranch books? I don't need to look at them. I know what we owe. Do you? Walter challenged. Caleb's fork clattered against his plate. What's that supposed to mean? Means you've been so busy trying to keep this place from falling apart that you haven't noticed the supply bills don't match what we're actually getting. Walter crossed his arms. I've been trying to tell you for a month. Caleb went very still. What? The feed order from Hughes's store. You ordered 50 pounds of oats, got 42, paid for 50. That's... Caleb stopped. Are you sure? I can count, Caleb. Why didn't you say something? I just did. You weren't listening. Caleb looked at Eleanor, then at Walter, then at his plate. Show me, he said quietly. An hour later, Eleanor was standing in front of a battered desk in the corner of the main room, staring at the most disorganized set of account books she'd ever seen. There were 3 ledgers, none of them labeled, receipts stuffed between pages, notes written in margins that contradicted the numbers in the columns, entire months missing, and the handwriting, Eleanor assumed it was Caleb's, was barely legible. This is a disaster, she said. Caleb stood beside her, arms crossed, jaw tight. I never said I was good at it. Good at it? You're not even... Eleanor caught herself, took a breath. When did you last reconcile these? What does that mean? Eleanor closed her eyes, opened them. It means, when did you last check to make sure what you're paying matches what you're getting? Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Never. Eleanor turned to look at him. Never? I didn't. My wife used to handle it before she died. After that, He gestured vaguely at the books. I made sure we didn't run out of money. You don't know if you're running out of money if you're not keeping proper records. We're still here, aren't we? Barely, Walter muttered from his chair by the stove. Caleb shot him a look. Eleanor sat down at the desk and pulled the nearest ledger toward her. The first page was dated January 1873, over a year and a half ago. She flipped through it slowly, scanning the entries. Supplies from Hughes's general store, lumber from the mill, feed, tools, veterinary services. Every transaction recorded in Caleb's cramped handwriting, with amounts and dates but no running total, no balance, no way to tell at a glance whether they were going under or staying afloat. Do you have the receipts? Eleanor asked. Some of them. Where? Caleb opened a drawer and pulled out a fistful of crumpled papers. Eleanor spread them on the desk and started sorting. 2 hours later, she had found 6 discrepancies. Not just the oats. Also a lumber order that was short by 15 boards. A veterinary bill that charged for 2 visits when the vet had only come once. A feed delivery that was supposed to include salt licks but didn't. Small things. The kind of things that wouldn't ruin a man if they happened once or twice. But they'd been happening for over a year. Eleanor sat back in the chair and rubbed her eyes. How much? Caleb asked quietly. She looked up. He was still standing there, arms crossed, face unreadable. Altogether? Eleanor picked up her pencil and did the math on a scrap of paper. Roughly $43. Walter whistled low. That's 2 months of feed. Caleb didn't say anything. His jaw worked. His hands flexed. It might be an accident, Eleanor said carefully. Mistakes happen. 6 times? Walter said. All in Hughes's favor? Eleanor didn't answer. She didn't have to. Caleb turned and walked out of the house. The door slammed behind him. Eleanor and Walter sat in silence. He doesn't get angry much, Walter said finally, but when he does, it burns cold. What will he do? Walter shrugged. Probably nothing. He can't afford to lose Hughes as a supplier. It's the only store in 50 miles. Eleanor looked down at the ledgers, at the receipts, at the $43 that had disappeared into Vernon Hughes's pocket while Caleb Boone struggled to keep his ranch alive. That's not right, she said. No, Walter agreed. It's not. But that's how things are out here. The men with stores and banks and land, they squeeze. And men like Caleb just try to hold on. Eleanor's hands curled into fists. He's not a bad man, Walter added quietly. In case you were wondering. Eleanor looked at him. He's proud, Walter continued, and he's stubborn, and he doesn't always know what to say. But he's not cruel. He works harder than any man I've known. He just... Walter paused. He's been alone too long, forgotten how to let people help. His wife, Eleanor said. How did she die? Fever, 3 years ago. They'd only been married 2 years. She was... Walter's face softened. She was small, delicate, the kind of woman men write poems about. Caleb worshipped her. Eleanor felt something twist in her chest. He took it hard when she died, Walter went on. Stopped talking much. Stopped going to town unless he had to. Just worked. From sunup to sundown, like if he stopped moving, he'd fall apart. And now he's sent for another wife. Now he's sent for help, Walter corrected gently. There's a difference. Eleanor looked back at the ledgers. Help, not a wife. Not a partner. Help. I'm going to fix these books, she said quietly. Walter nodded. Good. Eleanor didn't see Caleb again until the next morning. She woke before dawn, habit from years of getting up early to beat the boarding house crowds to the washroom, and found him already in the kitchen, standing at the stove with a pot of coffee. He glanced at her when she came in, then away. Morning, he said. Morning. Eleanor crossed to the table and sat down. Caleb poured 2 cups of coffee, brought one to her, then leaned against the counter with his own. They didn't speak. Outside, the sky was turning gray at the edges. A rooster crowed somewhere near the barn. I'm going into town today, Caleb said finally. Eleanor looked up. To talk to Hughes? Caleb's mouth tightened. No. Why not? Because I can't prove anything. It's his word against mine. You have the receipts. I have receipts that show I got less than I paid for. That doesn't prove he did it on purpose. Eleanor set her cup down. So you're just going to let him steal from you? I'm going to be more careful going forward. That's not... It's the best I can do, Caleb said sharply. Then, quieter. I can't afford to make enemies, Eleanor. Miss Vale, he corrected himself. I need Hughes's store. I need his credit. If I accuse him of cheating me and he cuts me off, he shook his head. I can't risk it. Eleanor stared at him. At this man who worked himself to the bone, who carried the weight of a dying ranch on his shoulders, who was being robbed in plain sight and couldn't do a damn thing about it because the system was rigged against men like him. What are you going to town for then? She asked. Supplies. And to talk to the preacher. Eleanor's stomach dropped. About what? Caleb looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time since she'd arrived. About the wedding, he said. If you still want to go through with it. The question hung in the air between them. Eleanor thought about the boarding house in Philadelphia, the landlady's pitying looks, the gentleman caller who'd fled through the back door, the long empty years stretching ahead of her with nothing but other people's laundry and lonely rooms. She thought about this house, this ranch, this hard, silent man who couldn't defend her in public, but who'd apologized in private, who was drowning and didn't know how to ask for help. I signed a contract, Eleanor said. Contracts can be broken. Is that what you want? Caleb's jaw worked. I'm asking what you want. Eleanor picked up her coffee cup, took a sip, set it down. I want to see the ranch books again, she said. All of them. Supply orders, payroll, everything. I want to know exactly how bad things are. Caleb blinked. Why? Because if I'm going to marry you and live here, I need to know what I'm walking into. I already told you. Drought, debt, it's not... I want to see the numbers, Eleanor said firmly. Caleb studied her. Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, maybe, or the beginning of respect. All right, he said slowly. When I get back from town. Good. They looked at each other. I'll go talk to the preacher, Caleb said. See if he can do it next Sunday. Eleanor nodded. Caleb pushed off from the counter and headed for the door. He paused with his hand on the handle. Eleanor? He stopped. Miss Vale, thank you for finding the discrepancies. You're welcome. He left. Eleanor sat alone in the kitchen and watched the sun rise through the window. Caleb came back from town just after noon with a wagon full of supplies and a face like a thundercloud. Walter helped him unload while Eleanor worked on organizing the pantry, a task that desperately needed doing, since half the food stores were spoiling from poor storage and the other half were buried so deep she suspected Caleb had forgotten they existed. She heard raised voices from the yard and went to the window. Caleb and Walter were standing near the wagon. Caleb had his arms crossed. Walter was gesturing sharply. Can't be serious, Walter was saying. I'm dead serious, Caleb said. That's insane. It's what he wants. Then tell him to... I can't, Caleb cut him off. I already owe him too much. Walter swore, loud enough for Eleanor to hear through the window. She stepped outside. Both men turned to look at her. Is something wrong? Eleanor asked. Caleb's jaw tightened. No. He's lying, Walter said flatly. Hughes is squeezing him. Walter, she should know, Walter said. If she's going to marry you, she should know what kind of vultures are circling. Caleb looked like he wanted to argue. Then his shoulders sagged. Fine, he said. He turned to Eleanor. Vernon Hughes says I owe him $112. He wants it paid by the end of the month, or he's calling in the debt. Eleanor felt her blood go cold. 112? That's what he claims. What do your books say? Caleb hesitated. 86? So he's adding $26 that doesn't exist? He says it's interest and late fees. Were those terms in the original agreement? Caleb stopped. I don't know. I didn't keep the paperwork. Of course he didn't. Eleanor's mind was already racing. When did you take out the credit? Last fall, after the drought started. And you've been making payments? When I can. How much? $5 a month, sometimes 10. Eleanor did the math in her head. 9 months. Anywhere from $45 to $90 paid. If he owed 86 now, that meant the original debt was, he loaned you over $150, she said slowly. Caleb nodded. For what? Feed, supplies, vet bills, everything I needed to keep the ranch running through the winter. And now he wants it all back. Now he wants it back, Caleb agreed. His voice was flat, defeated. And I don't have it. Walter spat into the dirt. He knows that. That's why he's doing it. He wants you to default so he can take the ranch. Eleanor's head snapped toward him. Can he do that? If Caleb can't pay, he can file a lien, Walter said grimly. And if Caleb can't clear the lien, he forecloses, Eleanor finished. Caleb said nothing. Eleanor looked at him. At this man who'd sent for a wife because he was desperate and alone and drowning. Who'd frozen in front of his town because he was ashamed and didn't know how to fix it. Who was about to lose everything he'd built because a store owner was squeezing him dry. Let me see the original agreement, Eleanor said. I told you, I don't have it. Then let me see whatever you do have, every receipt, every payment, every piece of paper related to Vernon Hughes. Caleb frowned. Why? Because maybe he made a mistake. He didn't make a mistake, Walter said. He's a snake. Snakes don't make mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes, Eleanor said. We just need to find his. They found it 3 hours later. Eleanor was cross-checking Caleb's payment receipts against the dates he'd written in his ledger when she noticed something odd. This payment, she said, pointing, March 15th, you wrote that you paid Hughes $10. I did. Where's the receipt? Caleb shuffled through the stack of papers on the desk. Should be here somewhere. It's not. Then I lost it. Or he never gave you one. Caleb looked at her. Eleanor tapped the ledger. You have receipts for every other payment. January, February, April, May. All here. But March is missing. So? So if he never recorded it, he can claim you didn't pay. Walter, who'd been sitting nearby whittling a piece of wood, stopped mid-cut. That's $10. Exactly, Eleanor said. And if you add the other discrepancies we found, the short orders, the phantom charges, Walter's eyes widened. That's more than $26. Eleanor looked at Caleb. Did you pay in cash or check? Cash. Damn. Do you remember anything about the transaction? Eleanor pressed. Who else was there? What time of day? Anything? Caleb's brow furrowed. It was afternoon, I think. Hughes wasn't at the counter. His clerk was. Skinny kid, maybe 17. What was his name? I don't... Caleb stopped. Ben something. Do you think he'd remember? Maybe, if he's still working there. Eleanor stood up. Then we need to talk to him. Caleb stared at her. You want to go back to town? Today? The end of the month is 2 weeks away. We don't have time to wait. Eleanor, if Hughes is cheating you, we need proof, Eleanor said firmly. And if this Ben saw you make that payment, he's proof. Hughes will never let us talk to him. Then we don't ask Hughes. Caleb and Walter exchanged a look. She's got spine, Walter said. I'll give her that. Caleb rubbed his face with both hands. This is a bad idea. Do you have a better one? Eleanor asked. He didn't answer. We leave in an hour, Eleanor said. She turned and headed for her room to change into something less covered in dust. Behind her, she heard Walter laugh, a dry, raspy sound. I like her, he said. Caleb's response was too quiet for Eleanor to hear, but she thought it might have been. So do I. They reached Black Hollow just before sunset. The town looked different in the fading light, smaller somehow, and meaner. The main street was nearly empty except for a few men loitering outside the saloon and a woman sweeping the steps of the boarding house. Caleb pulled the wagon to a stop in front of Hughes's general store. The lights were still on inside. Wait here, Caleb said. No, Eleanor said. He turned to look at her. Eleanor, you said the clerk's name was Ben. I'm coming with you. This isn't... If you're trying to protect me, don't, Eleanor said flatly. I didn't come out here to hide in wagons. Caleb's jaw worked. Then he sighed and climbed down. Eleanor followed. The bell over the door jangled as they stepped inside. The store was crammed with goods, barrels of flour and sugar, shelves of canned food, tools hanging from the ceiling, bolts of fabric stacked in the corner. It smelled like sawdust and tobacco. A young man stood behind the counter, counting coins into a cash box. He looked up when they entered. "We're closing soon," he said. "Are you Ben?" Eleanor asked. The young man blinked. "Yes, ma'am." "My name is Eleanor Vale. This is Caleb Boone. We need to ask you about a payment Mr. Boone made in March." Ben's face went carefully blank. March 15th, Eleanor continued. $10, cash. Do you remember?" "I see a lot of transactions, ma'am." "But you remember this one," Eleanor said. It wasn't a question. Ben looked past them toward the back of the store. "I really can't." "Can't what?" The voice came from the doorway behind the counter. A man stepped through, late 50s with slicked back hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Vernon Hughes. "Mr. Boone," Hughes said pleasantly. "Didn't expect to see you again so soon." Caleb's hands curled into fists. "We had a question about a payment." "Did you?" Hughes's smile widened. "Well, I'm afraid the books are closed for the day. You'll have to come back tomorrow." "We just need to speak with Ben," Eleanor said. Hughes's eyes shifted to her. His smile cooled. "And you are?" "Eleanor Vale." "Ah, the mail-order bride." Hughes looked her up and down. "Heard you arrived yesterday. Quite the spectacle from what I'm told." Eleanor's spine stiffened. "Ben doesn't talk to customers without my permission," Hughes continued, "and I don't give permission for conversations about store business outside of business hours." "This is business hours," Caleb said tightly. "Not anymore." Hughes crossed his arms. "Now, if you'll excuse us, we have closing procedures to complete." Eleanor stepped forward. "Mr. Hughes, if there's been an error in your records, there hasn't been." "You haven't even heard—" "I don't need to hear," Hughes said. His voice lost its pleasant edge. "I keep excellent records, Miss Vale. If Mr. Boone claims he paid me money that's not reflected in my books, then either he's mistaken or he's lying." Caleb moved. Eleanor didn't see him cross the space. Just suddenly he was there, inches from Hughes, vibrating with barely controlled rage. "Call me a liar again," Caleb said softly. Hughes didn't flinch. "You want to threaten me, Boone? In my own store? In front of witnesses? I want you to check your damn records." "I already did. You owe me $112, due by the end of the month. If you can't pay—" Hughes shrugged. "Well, I'm sure we can work something out." Eleanor saw it in his face. The calculation. The greed. He wanted the ranch. "Come on, Caleb," Eleanor said quietly. She put a hand on his arm. "Let's go." Caleb didn't move. "Caleb," Eleanor said again, firmer this time. Slowly, Caleb stepped back. His fists were shaking. Hughes's smile returned. "Always a pleasure, Boone. Give my regards to your new bride." Caleb turned and walked out. Eleanor followed. But as she reached the door, she glanced back. Ben was standing behind the counter, staring at the floor. And for just a second, he looked up and met her eyes. Then he looked away. They didn't speak on the ride back to the ranch. Caleb drove with his jaw clenched and his shoulders rigid. Eleanor sat beside him and watched the darkening prairie roll past. When they finally pulled into the ranch yard, Caleb brought the wagon to a stop, climbed down, and started unhitching the horses without a word. Eleanor sat there for a moment, then climbed down herself. "Caleb, not now," he said. "We need to talk about—" "I said not now." His voice cracked like a whip. Eleanor froze. Caleb stood with his back to her, hands braced on the wagon. His shoulders were heaving. "I can't—" He stopped. Started again. "I can't do this tonight, Eleanor. He shook his head. "I need to be alone." Eleanor wanted to argue, wanted to tell him that running away wouldn't fix anything, but she also knew what it looked like when a man was holding on by his fingernails. "All right," she said quietly. She turned and walked into the house. Inside, she lit a lamp and sat down at the desk. The ledgers were still there, spread out like a map of Caleb's slow unraveling. Eleanor pulled a blank piece of paper toward her and picked up a pencil. Then she started writing. 2 hours later, there was a knock on her bedroom door. Eleanor looked up from where she'd been sitting on the bed, still dressed, staring at the ceiling. "Come in," she said. The door opened. Caleb stood in the doorway, hat in his hands. "I'm sorry," he said. Eleanor sat up. "For what?" "For snapping at you. You were trying to help, and I—" He exhaled. "I took it out on you. That wasn't fair." Eleanor studied him. He looked exhausted, defeated. "You're scared," she said. Caleb's jaw tightened. "I'm not." "You're terrified," Eleanor continued, "of losing this place, of failing, of being the man who couldn't hold on to what his father built." Caleb didn't deny it. "I understand," Eleanor said, "but you're not alone anymore. Aren't I?" "No." Eleanor stood up and crossed to where he stood. "You hired me to help, so let me help. You can't fix this. Maybe not, but I can try." She paused. "Unless you've changed your mind about the wedding." Caleb looked at her, really looked at her. At this tall, broad-shouldered woman who'd stepped off a stagecoach into a town full of mockery and hadn't flinched, who'd spent hours sorting through his disaster of an account system, who'd marched into Vernon Hughes's store and demanded answers. "I haven't changed my mind," he said quietly. "Good," Eleanor said, "because neither have I." They stood there in the doorway, not quite touching, not quite separate. "Sunday," Caleb said. "The preacher can do it Sunday." "All right. It won't be fancy." "I don't need fancy." Caleb nodded slowly. Then he stepped back. "Good night, Eleanor." "Good night, Caleb." He closed the door. Eleanor stood there for a long moment, listening to his footsteps cross the main room. Then she turned and looked at the paper she'd left on the bed. It was covered in numbers, calculations, a plan that was probably foolish and definitely risky. But it was a plan, and right now, that was more than Caleb Boone had. Eleanor picked up the paper, folded it carefully, and tucked it under her pillow. Then she blew out the lamp and lay down in the darkness. Outside, the Wyoming wind howled across the prairie, dry and merciless and endless. But inside, in a tiny room in a dying ranch house, Eleanor Vale closed her eyes and allowed herself to hope. Just a little. Just enough. Eleanor woke Sunday morning to the smell of burned coffee and the sound of Caleb swearing in the kitchen. She dressed quickly in the only decent dress she owned, dark blue cotton, high-necked, with sleeves she'd mended twice, and braided her hair with fingers that trembled just enough to annoy her. It was her wedding day. The thought sat in her stomach like a stone. When she emerged from her room, Caleb was standing at the stove, staring at a pot of something that looked like tar. "I ruined it," he said without turning around. "I can see that." He glanced at her, then away. He was wearing a clean shirt, or at least cleaner than usual, and he'd shaved. There was a small nick on his jaw where the razor had slipped. "You look—" He stopped, cleared his throat. "Nice. Thank you." They stood in awkward silence. "Walter's getting the wagon ready," Caleb said finally. "Town's expecting us at 10. Eleanor nodded. "You can still change your mind," Caleb added quietly. Eleanor looked at him. At this man who'd apologized twice, who was trying so hard to do right by her even though he clearly had no idea how. "Can you?" she asked. Caleb's eyes met hers. "No." "Then I guess we're getting married." Something flickered across his face. Relief, maybe, or fear, possibly both. "Guess so," he said. They rode to town in silence, with Walter driving and Tommy sitting in the back, trying not to stare at Eleanor like she was about to bolt from the moving wagon. Black Hollow looked the same as it had 3 days ago. Same dusty street, same suspicious faces, same feeling of being watched by a town that had already decided she didn't belong. The church was a small wooden building at the end of the main street, with a crooked steeple and windows that needed washing. A handful of people had gathered outside. Eleanor's stomach clenched. "You invited people?" she said to Caleb. "I didn't invite anyone," Caleb said. He sounded as surprised as she felt. Walter pulled the wagon to a stop. "News travels fast in small towns." That was an understatement. There were at least 20 people clustered near the church steps. Eleanor recognized some of them from the stagecoach incident. The woman in the blue bonnet, the man who'd made the lumberjack comment, others whose faces blurred together in a sea of judgment. She also saw Vernon Hughes standing near the back, arms crossed, watching. Caleb climbed down from the wagon and offered Eleanor his hand. She took it. His palm was rough and warm and shaking slightly. Together they walked toward the church. The crowd parted to let them through. No one said anything, but Eleanor could feel their eyes on her, measuring, judging, waiting to see if she'd go through with it or if Caleb would change his mind at the last second. The preacher was waiting inside, a thin man in his 60s with kind eyes and a nervous smile. "Mr. Boone," he said. "Miss Vale, welcome." "Reverend Hayes," Caleb said. He still hadn't let go of Eleanor's hand. "Shall we begin?" Caleb looked at Eleanor. She nodded. They stood in front of the altar while Reverend Hayes opened his Bible and half the town filed in behind them. Eleanor could hear the rustle of skirts, the shuffle of boots, the whispers that weren't quite quiet enough. "Dearly beloved," Reverend Hayes began. Eleanor stopped listening. She was too aware of Caleb beside her, too aware of the people watching, too aware that in about 5 minutes she would be legally bound to a man she'd known for less than a week. A man who'd frozen when his town mocked her. A man who was about to lose everything to a snake in a suit. A man who looked at her sometimes like she was the answer to a question he'd forgotten how to ask. "Do you, Caleb Boone, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Caleb's hand tightened on hers. "I do," he said. His voice was steady. "And do you, Eleanor Vale, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Eleanor looked at Caleb, at the scar above his left eyebrow, at the gray in his hair, at the exhaustion in his eyes. This was her last chance to walk away. "I do," Eleanor said. Reverend Hayes smiled. "Then by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." Caleb went very still. Eleanor's heart hammered. Then Caleb leaned in and pressed a brief, awkward kiss to her lips. It lasted maybe 2 seconds. His mouth was dry. He pulled away before Eleanor had time to decide if she wanted to kiss him back. Behind them, someone clapped. Then others joined in, and suddenly the whole church was applauding. Polite, restrained, the kind of applause you'd give a mediocre speech. Caleb and Eleanor turned to face the crowd. Vernon Hughes was smiling. Eleanor felt cold. They signed the papers in Reverend Hayes's office while Walter and Tommy stood as witnesses. Eleanor's hand was steady as she wrote her new name for the first time. Eleanor Boone. It looked strange on the page, foreign, permanent. When they emerged from the church, several people congratulated them, stiff handshakes, careful smiles. The woman in the blue bonnet, whose name Eleanor learned was Nora Whitmore, actually nodded at her. "Welcome to Black Hollow, Mrs. Boone," Nora said. "Mrs. Boone." Eleanor forced a smile. "Thank you." Vernon Hughes approached as they were climbing back into the wagon. "Congratulations, Boone," he said. "Mrs. Boone." He tipped his hat to Eleanor. "I hope you'll be very happy together." Caleb's jaw tightened. "We will be." "Good, good." Hughes glanced at the wagon. "Heading back to the ranch?" "That's the plan." "Well, don't let me keep you." Hughes smiled. "Oh, one more thing. About that payment. End of the month still stands. I'm sure your new wife will help you figure something out." Eleanor felt Caleb tense beside her. "We'll manage," Caleb said tightly. "I'm sure you will." Hughes stepped back. "Enjoy your wedding day." He walked away. Caleb stood there, hands curled into fists, breathing hard through his nose. "Caleb," Eleanor said quietly, "I'm fine." "You're not." "I'm fine," he repeated. He climbed into the wagon. Eleanor followed. They rode back to the ranch in silence. That night, Caleb slept in the barn. Eleanor didn't ask why. She just lay in her small room, their small room now, she supposed, though it felt no different, and stared at the ceiling. She was married, to a stranger, in a town that hated her, with a debt hanging over their heads like a guillotine. Eleanor closed her eyes and tried to sleep. It didn't work. The next morning, Eleanor woke before dawn and went straight to the desk in the main room. She pulled out the plan she'd written 3 nights ago and read it again. It was still risky. It was still probably foolish, but it was all she had. She was making coffee when Caleb came in from the barn. His hair was sticking up on one side and there was hay in his shirt. "Morning," he said. "Morning." He poured himself coffee and sat down at the table without looking at her. Eleanor sat across from him. "We need to talk," she said. "About what?" "About the $112 you don't have." Caleb's jaw tightened. "I told you. I'll figure something out." "How?" "I don't know yet." "Well, I do," Eleanor said. Caleb looked up. Eleanor pulled the folded paper from her pocket and spread it on the table between them. "What's this?" Caleb asked. "A plan." He picked up the paper and read it. His frown deepened with every line. "You want to sell the cattle," he said slowly. "The yearlings." "Yes." "Eleanor, hear me out," she said. "You have 43 head of cattle, right?" 41 now. Lost 2 in the drought. 41. How many are yearlings? Caleb was quiet for a moment. 12? Maybe 13? And what are they worth? Depends on the market. $8, $10 a head. So if you sold all 12, that's $96 to $120. Caleb set the paper down. "I can't sell the yearlings. They're next year's stock. If I sell them now..." "You'll have breathing room," Eleanor finished. "You'll clear the debt. You'll get Hughes off your back, and you'll still have 28 head to rebuild with. And if next year's drought is worse, then you'll be in the same position you're in now, but at least you won't have lost the ranch." Caleb rubbed his face with both hands. "It's not that simple." "Why not?" "Because selling cattle in August is... No one sells in August. You wait until fall when they've had time to fatten up. Buyers pay more." "Buyers also exist in August," Eleanor said. "Maybe you won't get top dollar, but you'll get something, and something is better than losing everything." Caleb stood up and walked to the window. He stood there with his back to her, shoulders rigid. "I don't like it," he said. "I know. It feels like giving up." "It's not giving up. It's surviving." Caleb was quiet for a long time. "Where would I even sell them?" he asked finally. "There's a cattle buyer in Laramie. I saw an advertisement at the general store. He's buying through the end of September." Caleb turned to look at her. "You've been planning this." "Yes." "For how long?" "Since the night Hughes cornered you." Something shifted in Caleb's expression. He crossed the room and sat back down at the table. "Laramie's 3 days' drive," he said. "Maybe 4 with cattle." "I know." "I'd have to take Walter. Leave you and Tommy here alone." "We'll manage." "Eleanor?" "We'll manage," she repeated firmly. Caleb stared at the paper, at her careful handwriting, at the numbers that added up to their only chance. "If I do this," he said slowly, "and it doesn't work, then we'll figure out something else." "There might not be anything else." Eleanor reached across the table and put her hand over his. Caleb went very still. "Trust me," Eleanor said. Caleb looked at their hands, then at her face. "All right," he said quietly. "I'll do it." Eleanor felt something loosen in her chest. "When?" "Soon as I can round up the yearlings. Tomorrow maybe. Day after at the latest." "Good." They sat there for a moment, hands still touching. Then Caleb pulled away and stood up. "I need to talk to Walter." He left. Eleanor sat alone at the table and allowed herself a small, private moment of relief. It wasn't over yet, not by a long shot. But at least they were fighting back. Caleb and Walter left 2 days later with 12 head of cattle and enough supplies for a week. Eleanor stood in the yard and watched them disappear over the hill. Then she turned to Tommy, who was trying very hard to look like he knew what he was doing. "All right," Eleanor said, "let's get to work." The first thing she did was take inventory of everything on the ranch. Every tool, every bag of feed, every plank of wood, every nail. Tommy followed her around with a notebook, writing down everything she called out. "What are we doing this for?" he asked after the first hour. "Because I want to know exactly what we have," Eleanor said, "and what we need. Mr. Boone never did this." "I'm not Mr. Boone." Tommy grinned. "No, ma'am, you sure aren't." By the end of the day, Eleanor had a complete list. She sat at the desk that night and compared it to the supply orders in Caleb's ledgers. The discrepancies jumped out immediately. Caleb had ordered 60 pounds of oats in June. According to her inventory, they had 38 pounds. He'd ordered 40 feet of rope in May. They had 26 feet. He'd ordered a dozen horseshoes in April. They had 7. Eleanor's hand tightened on her pencil. Vernon Hughes wasn't just skimming. He was robbing them blind. She made a new list, every discrepancy, every missing item, every dollar that had disappeared into Hughes's pockets. When she was finished, the total made her stomach turn. $67. Not 43. 67. Eleanor sat back in her chair and stared at the number. That was enough to cover more than half the debt Caleb supposedly owed, if she could prove it. The next morning, Eleanor rode into town alone. Tommy had protested, said it wasn't safe for her to go by herself, said Caleb would be furious, said she should at least take him along. Eleanor told him to stay and watch the ranch. Then she climbed into the wagon and drove to Black Hollow. The town was quiet when she arrived. Mid-morning. Most people were working. The street was nearly empty except for a few women outside the dry goods store and an old man asleep on a bench. Eleanor tied the horses outside Hughes's general store and went inside. The bell jangled. Ben looked up from behind the counter. When he saw her, his face went pale. "Mrs. Boone," he said. "Ben." Eleanor crossed to the counter. "Is Mr. Hughes here?" He stepped out. Won't be back for an hour." "Perfect." "Good," Eleanor said. "Then I'd like to talk to you." Ben's eyes widened. "I can't." "Yes, you can." Eleanor pulled the list from her pocket and set it on the counter. "I need you to look at this." "Ma'am, I really shouldn't—" "Ben," Eleanor's voice was quiet but firm. "I'm not here to get you in trouble. I just need to know the truth." Ben stared at the list. His hands were shaking. "Please," Eleanor said. Slowly, Ben picked up the paper. His eyes scanned the entries, then he set it down and looked at Eleanor with something close to desperation. "I can't help you," he said. "Can't or won't?" "Both." Ben glanced toward the door. "If Mr. Hughes finds out I talked to you, he won't. You don't know that." "Ben," Eleanor leaned forward. "Look at me." He did. "That list represents $67 that my husband paid for goods he never received," Eleanor said. $67 we can't afford to lose. $67 that might cost us our ranch. She paused. "If you know something, anything, about where that money went, I need you to tell me." Ben's face crumpled. "I'm sorry." "Why are you sorry?" "Because—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "Because I'm the one who altered the orders." Eleanor's blood went cold. "What?" "Mr. Hughes told me to," Ben said quickly. He said it was just adjusting for waste, that all stores did it, that it was normal. Stealing isn't normal. I know that now. Ben's voice cracked. But I needed the job. My ma's sick, and my pa's dead, and if I lose this job, we lose our house. He looked at Eleanor with red-rimmed eyes. "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, but I can't testify against him. If I do, he'll fire me, and then—" He didn't finish. Eleanor's anger drained away, replaced by something colder, pity. "How many others?" she asked. Ben blinked. "What?" "How many other ranchers is he doing this to?" Ben was quiet for a long moment. "All of them," he said finally. Eleanor felt dizzy. "All of them?" Ben nodded. "Everyone who buys on credit. He shaves a little off every order, not enough that they notice right away, just enough to add up over time." He looked down at his hands. "He's been doing it for years." Eleanor's mind was racing. If Hughes was stealing from everyone, if there were other ranchers with the same missing goods, the same inflated debts. "Ben," Eleanor said slowly, "would you be willing to talk to those ranchers? Tell them what you just told me?" "I can't." "Not publicly, not in front of Hughes, just—" Eleanor grabbed a scrap of paper and a pencil from the counter. "If I gave you a list of names, could you go to them? Quietly? Tell them to check their inventories against their orders?" Ben stared at her. "Why?" "Because if enough people realize what Hughes is doing, he won't be able to silence all of us. He'll know it was me." "Not if we're careful." Ben shook his head. "I can't risk it." Eleanor reached across the counter and grabbed his hand. He flinched. "Ben," she said, "I understand you're scared. I understand you need this job. But if you don't help us stop him, he's going to keep stealing. From my husband, from your neighbors, from people who can't afford to lose a single dollar. She squeezed his hand. You're not a thief. I can see that. But if you stay silent, you're helping him be one. Ben's eyes filled with tears. I don't know what to do, he whispered. Help us, Eleanor said simply. Ben pulled his hand away. He walked to the window and stood there, staring out at the street. Eleanor waited. Finally, Ben turned back to her. Give me the list, he said. Eleanor could have kissed him. Instead, she handed him the paper and a pencil. Write down the names of every rancher you know Hughes has cheated. Ben hesitated. Then he started writing. When he was finished, there were 11 names on the list. Start with these 3, Eleanor said, circling the names closest to town. Tell them what you told me. Tell them to check their records, and tell them to meet me at the church Saturday night after dark. Why the church? Because Hughes won't think to look there. Ben folded the list and tucked it into his pocket. If this goes wrong, it won't. You don't know that. You're right, Eleanor said. I don't. But I know what happens if we do nothing, and I'd rather fight and fail than give up without trying. Ben looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. Eleanor left the store before Hughes returned. She drove back to the ranch with her heart pounding and her hands shaking on the reins. What she'd just done was reckless, dangerous, possibly the stupidest thing she'd ever done in her life. But it was also the only chance they had. That night, Eleanor sat at the desk and made another list. This one was different. Evidence. She needed evidence that would hold up if this went to court, if it went to the law, if it went anywhere beyond a secret meeting in a church. She needed Hughes's own records, which meant she needed to get inside his store at night, when he wasn't there. Eleanor stared at the list for a long time. Then she folded it, tucked it into her pocket, and went to bed. She didn't sleep. Caleb and Walter returned late Friday afternoon with an empty wagon and exhausted horses. Eleanor was in the yard when they pulled in. She searched Caleb's face, trying to read the answer before he said anything. He climbed down from the wagon, walked toward her. Then he pulled a small leather pouch from his pocket and held it out. Eleanor took it, opened it. It was full of money. $123, Caleb said. His voice was rough with exhaustion. Buyer and Laramie paid better than I expected. Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. Caleb, don't, he said. He looked at her, really looked at her. You were right. I was wrong. That's all there is to it. Walter climbed down from the wagon, grinning. She's a smart one, Boone. You better hold on to her. Caleb's mouth twitched, planning on it. Eleanor clutched the pouch. $123. Enough to pay Hughes with money to spare. Enough to survive another month. Maybe 2. Thank you, she said. Caleb nodded, then he swayed slightly. Eleanor grabbed his arm. When did you last eat? Yesterday, maybe. Inside. Now. She made him sit at the table while she heated up the stew she'd made that morning. Caleb tried to argue that he needed to tend the horses first, but Walter waved him off. I got it, Walter said. You go be married or whatever it is you're supposed to do. Caleb was too tired to argue. Eleanor set a bowl in front of him and watched him eat. He finished it in about 30 seconds and looked up like he'd just remembered she existed. Sorry, he said. I was starving, I noticed. He almost smiled. Eleanor sat down across from him. I need to tell you something. Caleb's eyes sharpened. What happened? I went to town while you were gone. Why? To talk to Ben, Hughes's clerk. Caleb set down his spoon. Eleanor. He admitted to altering the supply orders, Eleanor said quickly. Hughes has been stealing from you, from everyone. $67 just from us alone. Caleb went very still. He admitted that? Yes. Will he testify? Not publicly. He's terrified of losing his job. But he's going to talk to the other ranchers, tell them to check their records. Why? Eleanor took a breath. Because I'm organizing a meeting. Tomorrow night. At the church. Everyone Hughes has been stealing from. Caleb stared at her. You did what? I organized? I heard you. Caleb stood up, started pacing. Eleanor, do you have any idea how dangerous that is? Yes. If Hughes finds out, he won't. You don't know that. Caleb, Eleanor stood and crossed to him. We have $123. That's enough to pay the debt and have a little left over, but it's not enough to stop him from doing this again, to us or to anyone else. So what are you planning to do? Eleanor met his eyes. I'm planning to build a case. Get every rancher he's cheated in one room, compare numbers, figure out exactly how much he's stolen, and then, she paused, then we go to the law. The law? Caleb laughed bitterly. Eleanor, the sheriff's on Hughes's payroll. Maybe the sheriff is, but the territorial judge isn't. Caleb blinked. What? There's a territorial judge who rides circuit through here twice a year. I asked Reverend Hayes about him when I was in town. He said the judge is honest, fair, and he doesn't take kindly to fraud. When's he coming through next? October. That's 2 months away, which gives us time to build a case that'll stick. Caleb rubbed his face. This is insane. Probably. We could lose everything. We could lose everything anyway. Caleb looked at her. At this woman he'd married less than a week ago. This woman who'd taken his broken accounts and his failing ranch and his crushing debt and somehow found a way forward. You're terrifying, he said. Eleanor smiled. Thank you. Despite himself, Caleb smiled back. Then his expression sobered. If we do this, if we go after Hughes, he's going to come after us. Hard. I know. He could call in the debt early, foreclose before we have time to pull. Then we pay him tomorrow, Eleanor said. We clear the debt, we get out from under his thumb, and then we make sure he can't do this to anyone else. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then he crossed the room, pulled Eleanor against him, and kissed her. It wasn't like the kiss at the church. That had been obligation, duty. This was something else entirely. When he pulled back, Eleanor's heart was racing. What was that for? She asked. For being the smartest person I've ever met, Caleb said. Then he kissed her again. The meeting at the church took place Saturday night at 10 o'clock. 11 people showed up. 8 ranchers, 2 farmers, and a widow who ran a boarding house on the edge of town. They gathered in the dark church, whispering to each other, nervous and angry in equal measure. Eleanor stood at the front with a lamp and the ledgers she'd brought from the ranch. Thank you for coming, she said. A man in the back, grizzled, late 50s with a face like carved stone, crossed his arms. Why are we here, Mrs. Boone? Because Vernon Hughes has been stealing from all of us, Eleanor said simply. Silence. Then everyone started talking at once. Eleanor held up her hand. I know you all have questions, but first I need you to do something. I need you to check your records. Every supply order you've placed with Hughes in the last year. Compare what you ordered to what you actually received. Why? Someone asked. Because I think you'll find discrepancies, Eleanor said. And I think when we add them all up, we'll have proof of systematic fraud. The man in the back, his name was Gideon Shaw, Eleanor learned, narrowed his eyes. You got proof already? Eleanor held up her ledger. $67 worth, from my ranch alone. Murmurs rippled through the room. Ben told me Hughes has been doing this for years, Eleanor continued. Small amounts, easy to miss, but they add up. And if we all compare numbers, we could take him down, Gideon finished. Eleanor nodded. And then what? Another man asked. Even if we prove it, the sheriff won't do anything. We're not going to the sheriff, Eleanor said. We're going to the territorial judge. More murmurs. These ones sounded almost hopeful. When? Gideon asked. October, when he rides through. That's a long time to wait. It is, Eleanor agreed, but it gives us time to build a case he can't ignore. Numbers, records, testimony. She paused. If we do this right, Hughes won't just lose customers. He'll lose everything. Gideon studied her. Then he turned to the room. I say we do it. Seconded, the widow said. One by one, the others agreed. Eleanor felt something warm spread through her chest. Hope. Real, tangible hope. All right, she said. Here's what we do next. They worked through the night, comparing records, counting discrepancies, building a case. By dawn, they had a number. $486. Stolen. From 11 people who could barely afford to lose 10. Eleanor stared at the total and felt rage burn through her exhaustion. We're going to bury him, Gideon said quietly. Yes, Eleanor said. We are. Eleanor walked into Vernon Hughes's store Monday morning with $112 in her pocket and murder in her eyes. The bell jangled. Ben looked up from the counter and went pale. Hughes emerged from the back room, wiping his hands on a cloth. When he saw Eleanor, his smile was all teeth. Mrs. Boone, he said, what a pleasant surprise. I'm here to settle my husband's account, Eleanor said. Hughes's eyebrows rose. Is that so? Eleanor set the money on the counter. $112, as agreed. Hughes picked up the bills and counted them slowly, twice. His smile faded. Well, he said, that's unexpected. Is it? Most men in your husband's position don't recover quite so quickly. Hughes set the money down. Might I ask where you came by this? That's not your concern. Of course not. Hughes pulled out his ledger and made a notation. Consider the debt paid in full. I want a receipt. Hughes looked at her. Naturally. He wrote out a receipt in careful handwriting and handed it to Eleanor. She read it twice before folding it and tucking it into her pocket. Pleasure doing business with you, Mrs. Boone, Hughes said. Eleanor turned to leave. Then she stopped and looked back. Mr. Hughes, she said, I counted our inventory last week. Hughes's expression didn't change. Did you? We're missing quite a bit of what we paid for. Are you accusing me of something? I'm stating a fact. Hughes set down his pen very carefully. Mrs. Boone, I run an honest business. If there are discrepancies in your orders, perhaps you should consider that your husband isn't as careful with his record-keeping as you might hope. My husband's records are fine, Eleanor said. It's your deliveries that are short. That's a serious allegation. Yes, it is. They stared at each other. I think we're done here, Hughes said quietly. Eleanor nodded. I think we are. She walked out. Behind her, she heard Hughes say something to Ben in a low, sharp voice. Eleanor climbed into the wagon and drove home with her hands shaking. Caleb was waiting in the yard when she arrived. He helped her down without a word. How'd it go? He asked. Eleanor pulled out the receipt and handed it to him. Caleb stared at it like it might disappear. It's done? It's done. We're clear? We're clear. Caleb let out a breath that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his chest. Then he pulled Eleanor into his arms and held her. Eleanor let herself lean into him, just for a moment, just long enough to feel the solid weight of him and remember that they were still standing. What did you say to him? Caleb asked against her hair. I told him we knew. Caleb pulled back. Eleanor, I didn't accuse him of anything specific. I just wanted him to know we're paying attention now. And how'd he take that? Eleanor thought about Hughes's face, the way his smile had frozen, the careful control in his voice. He's scared, she said. Good, Caleb said. He should be. The drought broke 3 days later. Not with rain, with fire. It started on the northern ridge late in the afternoon. A lightning strike, someone said later, though no one actually saw it happen. 1 minute the hills were brown and quiet. The next, smoke was pouring into the sky. Eleanor was in the kitchen when Walter burst through the door. Fire, he said. Eleanor's stomach dropped. Where? North Ridge, moving fast. Caleb was already grabbing buckets from the corner. How fast? Fast enough. Walter's face was grim. Wind's pushing it toward the creek crossing. The cattle, Tommy's moving them now. Caleb swore. He turned to Eleanor. Stay here. Like hell I will. Eleanor, I'm not staying here while the ranch burns, Eleanor said flatly. Tell me what to do. Caleb looked like he wanted to argue. Then he handed her a bucket. Fill these from the pump. Wet down the barn roof. Don't stop until I tell you. Eleanor took the bucket and ran. The next 3 hours were chaos. Smoke filled the air so thick Eleanor could barely see 10 feet in front of her. Her eyes burned. Her throat burned. Her lungs burned. She hauled water from the pump to the barn until her arms shook, climbed the ladder to the roof and poured bucket after bucket onto the dry shingles while embers rained down around her. Below she could hear Caleb and Walter shouting, horses screaming, the distant roar of the fire getting closer. Then someone started ringing the town bell. Eleanor looked up and saw wagons coming over the hill. 6 of them, maybe 7. Men and women from Black Hollow driving hard toward the fire. Gideon Shaw pulled his wagon into the yard first. He jumped down and started shouting orders. "Creek crossing's about to go," he yelled. "We need a fire break. Now!" The men scattered. Some grabbed shovels and started digging. Others formed a bucket line from the well to the edge of the property. Eleanor climbed down from the barn and joined the line. She found herself next to Nora Whitmore, the woman who'd called her freight wagon on the day she arrived. Nora took one look at Eleanor, face black with soot, dress soaked through, hands bleeding, and handed her a bucket without a word. They worked side by side in silence. The fire kept coming. It jumped the first fire break like it wasn't even there. Raced down the hill toward the creek crossing where most of the cattle were huddled. Eleanor heard a child scream. She spun around. Spun. A wagon had overturned near the crossing. A little girl, couldn't have been more than 8 years old, was trapped underneath, pinned by broken wood and panicked horses. 3 men were trying to reach her. The horses kept kicking, wild with fear. No one could get close. Eleanor didn't think. She just ran. She heard Caleb shout her name, heard someone else yell at her to stop. She didn't stop. She reached the wagon and dove under the nearest horse's neck. Its hoof came down inches from her head. She grabbed the broken wood pinning the girl and pulled. It didn't budge. "Help me," Eleanor shouted. A man appeared beside her. Gideon Shaw, she realized dimly. Together they lifted the wood. The girl scrambled out. Then the horse reared. Eleanor saw it coming. Tried to move. Wasn't fast enough. The hoof caught her across the ribs and sent her sprawling in the mud. Pain exploded through her side. She couldn't breathe. Someone was pulling her away from the wagon, away from the horses, hands on her arms, her back. Eleanor's vision went gray at the edges. When it cleared, she was lying on the ground and Caleb was kneeling over her. His face was white. "Eleanor. Eleanor, look at me." She tried to say something, coughed instead, tasted blood. "Don't move," Caleb said. His hands were shaking. "Just don't move." "The girl," Eleanor managed. "She's fine. You got her out." Eleanor closed her eyes, opened them. "Good. You're bleeding." "I know." Caleb ripped off his shirt and pressed it against her side. Eleanor hissed. "I'm sorry," Caleb said. "I'm sorry. I have to—" "It's okay," Eleanor said. Her voice sounded far away. "Is the fire—" "Forget the fire." "Caleb—" "I don't care about the fire," Caleb said. His voice cracked. "I don't care about the ranch. I care about you not dying in front of me." Eleanor looked up at him, at his soot-covered face, at the tears cutting tracks through the grime. "I'm not dying," she said. "You don't know that." "I do." Eleanor tried to sit up. Pain lanced through her ribs and she gasped. Caleb pushed her back down. "Stop moving. I need to see—" "You need to stay still before you bleed out." Eleanor wanted to argue, but the pain was getting worse and the gray was creeping back into her vision. She let Caleb hold pressure on her side and tried to focus on breathing. Around them, the chaos continued. Men shouted. Horses ran. The fire roared. And somewhere in the middle of it all, Eleanor heard Nora Whitmore's voice. "Is she alive?" "Yes," Caleb said. "Can she be moved?" "I don't know." "We need to move her. The fire's getting too close." "I'm not moving her until—" "Caleb," Nora's voice was sharp. "The barn's about to catch. If we don't move her now, you're both going to burn." Caleb looked at the barn, at the flames licking at the eastern corner. Then he looked down at Eleanor. "This is going to hurt," he said. "I know." Caleb slid one arm under her shoulders and the other under her knees. Eleanor bit down on a scream as he lifted her. The world tilted. Then everything went black. When Eleanor woke up, she was lying on something soft, not her bed. Too soft. She opened her eyes. She was in someone's parlor, clean, neat, curtains on the windows. Nora Whitmore was sitting in a chair beside her, sewing something. "You're awake," Nora said. Eleanor tried to sit up. Pain shot through her ribs and she fell back with a gasp. "Don't," Nora said. "You've got 3 cracked ribs and a gash across your side that took 22 stitches. You're not going anywhere." Eleanor stared at her. 22? "The horse kicked you hard enough to tear you open. You're lucky it didn't break your spine." Eleanor put a hand to her side. She was wearing a clean nightgown, bandages wrapped around her ribs. "How long have I been here?" she asked. 2 days. 2. Eleanor tried to sit up again. Failed. "The ranch, is it—" "Still standing," Nora said. "Barely. The barn's half gone. Most of the north pasture burned, but the house is intact." Caleb is fine, exhausted, covered in burns and bruises, but fine. Nora set down her sewing. "He's been here every day, sat in that chair for 16 hours straight the first night. I finally made him go home and sleep." Eleanor felt something tight in her chest. "He shouldn't have left the ranch. He wasn't going to leave you." "But, Mrs. Boone," Nora said, "your husband stood in the middle of my parlor and told me that if you died, he'd burn down the rest of the ranch himself. Then he sat in that chair and didn't move for 16 hours. She paused. "I've known Caleb Boone for 15 years. I've never seen him like that." Eleanor didn't know what to say. "You saved that little girl's life," Nora continued. "Mary Fisher. She's my niece. 8 years old. If you hadn't pulled her out—" Her voice caught. "Her parents wanted to come thank you. I told them to wait until you were strong enough to receive visitors." "I don't need thanks." "Yes, you do." Nora picked up her sewing again. "That girl would be dead if you hadn't run into those horses. Everyone saw it. Everyone knows it." She glanced at Eleanor. "The whole town's talking about you." Eleanor's stomach sank. "I'm sure they are." "Not the way you think," Nora said. "They're saying you're the bravest woman in Black Hollow." Eleanor blinked. "What?" "You heard me." "But I—" Eleanor stopped. "They laughed at me." "They did," Nora agreed. "And they were wrong. I was wrong." She set down her sewing and looked Eleanor in the eye. "I called you a freight wagon. I whispered about you with the other women. I judged you before I knew you." She paused. "I'm sorry." Eleanor stared at her. "You don't have to forgive me," Nora said, "but I wanted you to know." For a long moment, Eleanor didn't speak. Then she said, "You're taking care of me." "Yes." "Why?" Nora smiled faintly. "Because you ran into a fire to save my niece, and because—" She hesitated. "Because I think I misjudged you, and I'd like a chance to know who you really are." Eleanor felt tears sting her eyes. She blinked them back. "Thank you," she said quietly. Nora nodded, then she stood. "I'll let your husband know you're awake. He'll want to see you." She left. Eleanor lay there and stared at the ceiling. Her ribs hurt. Her side hurt. Everything hurt. But for the first time since she'd stepped off that stagecoach, she didn't feel like the whole town wanted her gone. Caleb arrived an hour later. He looked terrible. His face was haggard. His hands were wrapped in bandages. There was a burn across his left forearm that made Eleanor wince just looking at it. "You look awful," Eleanor said. Caleb let out a sound that might have been a laugh. "You're one to talk." He sat in the chair beside her and just looked at her for a long moment. "I thought I'd lost you," he said finally. "I'm harder to kill than I look." "Don't joke." "I'm not joking." Caleb reached out and took her hand. His grip was gentle, careful. "When I saw that horse kick you," he said quietly, "I thought—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "I thought I was watching you die." "I'm sorry." "Don't apologize. You saved that girl. You—" His voice broke. "You're a hero, Eleanor." "I'm not—" "Yes, you are." Caleb squeezed her hand. "The whole town knows it. The whole town saw what you did." Eleanor didn't know what to say to that. "How bad is the ranch?" she asked instead. Caleb's face darkened. "Bad. The barn needs rebuilding. We lost most of the feed stores. 15 head of cattle either burned or ran off. The north pasture's gone." Eleanor closed her eyes. "How much will it cost to fix?" "More than we have." Of course it did. "But we'll manage," Caleb added quickly. "We still have the house. We still have most of the herd, and—" He paused. "Gideon Shaw offered to lend me lumber. No interest. Said I could pay him back when I'm able." Eleanor's eyes opened. "He did?" "He did. So did 3 other men. And Nora Whitmore's organizing a barn raising next month." Caleb shook his head like he couldn't quite believe it. "People are helping us, Eleanor. The same people who laughed at you 2 weeks ago are showing up with food and supplies and offers to work." "Why?" Because you ran into a fire, Caleb said simply. Because you saved Mary Fisher. Because they realized they were wrong about you. Eleanor felt tears slip down her cheeks. Caleb wiped them away with his thumb. I'm sorry, he said. For what? For freezing when you stepped off that stagecoach, for not defending you when the town mocked you, for being too much of a coward to stand up for you when it mattered. Caleb, I was ashamed, Caleb continued, not of you, of myself. I'd sent for a mail-order bride because I was desperate and alone, and I didn't want to admit I couldn't do it by myself. And when you arrived and you weren't... He stopped. You weren't what I expected, and I didn't know how to handle it. What were you expecting? Caleb looked down at their joined hands. Someone small, quiet. Someone who'd stay in the background and not make waves. He met her eyes. Instead, I got you, and you're magnificent. You're smart and brave, and you don't back down from anything. You terrify me. Eleanor almost laughed. I terrify you? Yes. Caleb smiled slightly. In the best possible way. They sat in silence for a moment. I don't want a marriage of convenience anymore, Caleb said quietly. I don't want you to be just the woman who keeps my books and fixes my mistakes. Eleanor's heart started pounding. What do you want? Caleb lifted her hand and pressed it against his chest. I want a real marriage. I want you as my partner, my wife. Not because I need help, but because... He took a breath. Because I love you. Eleanor stopped breathing. I know it's fast, Caleb continued. I know we barely know each other. But when I thought I was losing you, his voice cracked. I realized that somewhere in the last 2 weeks, you became the most important thing in my life. And I don't want to go back to pretending this is just an arrangement. Eleanor stared at him. You don't have to say anything, Caleb said quickly. I just needed you to know. Caleb, Eleanor said. Yes? Stop talking and kiss me. Caleb blinked. Then he leaned down and kissed her. It hurt her ribs. She didn't care. When he pulled back, Eleanor was smiling through tears. I love you too, she said. Caleb let out a breath that sounded like relief and joy and disbelief all at once. Then he kissed her again. Eleanor stayed at Nora Whitmore's house for another week while her ribs healed. Caleb visited every day, sometimes twice a day. He brought her books from the ranch, sat with her and read aloud when she got tired, told her about the rebuilding efforts. Other people visited too. Mary Fisher's parents came with flowers and tears and gratitude that made Eleanor uncomfortable. Gideon Shaw stopped by with a bottle of whiskey and a gruff thank you. Even Reverend Hayes came, though he spent most of the visit talking to Nora and shooting worried glances at Eleanor like she might die in front of him. On the 8th day, Eleanor insisted on going home. Nora argued. Caleb argued. Eleanor ignored them both and got dressed. The ride back to the ranch was bumpy and painful, but Eleanor gritted her teeth and didn't complain. When they crested the last hill and the ranch came into view, Eleanor's breath caught. The barn was a blackened shell. The north pasture was a wasteland of ash. The fence lines were charred. But the house was still standing, and there were people in the yard, a dozen of them, maybe more, working. Eleanor recognized some of them from the church meeting. Others were strangers. They were rebuilding the barn. Caleb pulled the wagon to a stop. Surprise! Eleanor stared. What is this? The barn raising. Nora moved it up when she heard you were coming home. But it's not even close to finished. It will be, Caleb said. By the end of the week, Gideon says. Maybe sooner if more people show up. Eleanor watched the men work, hauling lumber, hammering nails, moving like they'd done this 100 times before. Why are they doing this? She asked. Because you're one of them now, Caleb said simply. Eleanor looked at him. You ran into a fire to save one of their children, Caleb continued. You organized a case against a man who's been stealing from them for years. You're not an outsider anymore, Eleanor. You're part of this town. Eleanor felt something break open in her chest. She'd spent her whole life being too much, too tall, too broad, too smart, too everything. And here, in this brutal little town in the middle of nowhere, she'd finally found a place that wanted her anyway. Come on, Caleb said. Let's get you inside before you start crying in front of everyone. Eleanor laughed. Then she let him help her down from the wagon. That night, Eleanor sat at the desk and looked at the case files she'd been building against Vernon Hughes. $486. 11 families. 3 years of systematic theft. She had the numbers. She had the testimonies. She had Ben's statement, written in shaky handwriting and hidden in the bottom of her trunk. What she didn't have was Hughes's own records. Without those, it was their word against his. And words didn't hold up in court. She needed proof, which meant she needed to get into Hughes's store. At night, without getting caught. Eleanor stared at the ledgers for a long time. Then she made a decision that was either very brave or very stupid. Probably both. She waited until Caleb was asleep. Then she got dressed, grabbed a lantern, and slipped out of the house. Walter was sitting on the porch, whittling. He looked up when she appeared. "Where are you going?" he asked. "Town." "In the middle of the night?" "Yes." Walter studied her. "This about Hughes?" Eleanor hesitated, then nodded. Walter stood. "I'm coming with you." "Walter." "Don't argue. If you're breaking into that snake store, you're not doing it alone." Eleanor wanted to protest, but the truth was she was terrified. And having Walter along made her feel slightly less like she was about to do something catastrophically stupid. "Fine," she said. "But we have to be quiet, and if we get caught—" "We won't get caught," Walter said. They rode to Black Hollow in silence. The town was dark when they arrived. No lights in any windows, no movement on the streets. Eleanor tied the horses behind the church and led Walter through the alley to the back of Hughes's store. The door was locked. Eleanor pulled out the knife she'd brought and wedged it into the doorframe. She'd watched Tommy do this once when he'd locked himself out of the barn. The lock clicked. The door swung open. Eleanor and Walter slipped inside. The store was dark and silent. Eleanor lit the lantern and kept it low. "Where are the records?" Walter whispered. "Back office." "This way." They crept through the store to the door behind the counter. It was also locked. Eleanor used the knife again. The office was small and cramped. A desk, a filing cabinet, shelves full of ledgers. Eleanor went straight for the ledgers. She pulled down the one labeled 1874 and flipped it open. There, every transaction, every order, every payment, and next to each entry, in small, careful handwriting, the actual amounts delivered. Eleanor's hands shook as she turned the pages. Hughes had been tracking it all, every shorted order, every overcharge, every stolen dollar. He had records of his own theft. "Why would he write this down?" Walter whispered. "Because he's arrogant," Eleanor said. "He thought no one would ever look." She grabbed 3 more ledgers, 1873, 1872, 1871, and stacked them on the desk. "We need to copy these," she said. "All of them?" "As much as we can." They worked for 2 hours. Eleanor copied entries while Walter kept watch at the window. Her hand cramped. Her ribs ached. She ignored both. By the time they finished, she had 4 pages of notes documenting hundreds of fraudulent transactions. It was enough. Eleanor closed the ledgers and put them back exactly where she'd found them. Then she and Walter slipped out of the office, locked the door behind them, and left the store. They were halfway to the horses when Eleanor heard footsteps. She grabbed Walter's arm and pulled him into the shadows. A figure walked past the alley entrance, tall, male, walking with purpose. "Sheriff Dalton Reeves." Eleanor held her breath. The sheriff paused at the mouth of the alley, looked down it. Eleanor pressed herself against the wall. Then the sheriff kept walking. Eleanor and Walter waited 5 full minutes before moving. When they finally made it back to the horses, Eleanor's legs were shaking. "That was too close," Walter muttered. "I know." They rode back to the ranch in silence. When they arrived, Caleb was standing in the yard. His arms were crossed. His face was thunderous. "Where the hell have you been?" he said. Eleanor climbed down from the horse. "I can explain." "You better." Eleanor pulled out the papers she'd copied and handed them to him. Caleb unfolded them, read the first page, then the second. His eyes widened. "You broke into Hughes's store," he said slowly. "Yes." "You could have been caught." "I know." "You could have been arrested." "I know." Caleb looked at her, then at the papers, then back at her. "You're insane," he said. "Probably." Caleb started to laugh. It was a shocked, slightly hysterical sound. Then he pulled Eleanor into his arms and held her. Don't ever do that again, he said against her hair. I can't promise that. Eleanor, we have proof now, Eleanor said. Real proof. Hughes documented everything, every theft, every fraud, every dollar. She pulled back and looked at him. We can take him down. Caleb stared at her, at this woman who'd broken into a store in the middle of the night to steal evidence. Who'd risked everything to fight for people she barely knew. I'm never going to be able to control you, am I? He said. Eleanor smiled. No. Good, Caleb said. Then he kissed her. The stolen evidence sat on the kitchen table for 3 days while Eleanor figured out what to do with it. She couldn't go to Sheriff Reeves. Caleb had been right about that. The sheriff took his meals at Hughes's store, drank at Hughes's saloon, and probably owed the man money like everyone else in town. She couldn't wait for the territorial judge either. October was still 6 weeks away, and Hughes would notice his ledgers had been disturbed long before then. What she needed was leverage, something big enough to make Hughes back down before he realized what they'd taken from his office. Eleanor was still trying to solve that problem when Gideon Shaw showed up at the ranch on Thursday afternoon. He climbed down from his wagon and walked to where Eleanor was hanging laundry in the yard. Mrs. Boone, he said, touching his hat. Mr. Shaw. Gideon glanced at the house. Your husband around? In the barn with Walter. Should I get him? No, it's you I need to talk to. Eleanor set down the basket of wet clothes. All right. Gideon shifted his weight. He looked uncomfortable. I heard something. Thought you should know. Eleanor's stomach tightened. What did you hear? Hughes is asking questions about who was at that church meeting. How does he know there was a meeting? Someone talked. I don't know who, but he knows. Gideon paused. And he's putting pressure on people, calling in debts, refusing credit, making it real clear that anyone who goes against him is going to suffer for it. Eleanor felt cold. Has anyone backed out? 2 families so far, the Hendersons and the Pratts. They're scared. I don't blame them. Neither do I. Gideon crossed his arms. But the rest of us are still in. We want to see this through. We need to move faster before Hughes picks us off one by one. Eleanor nodded slowly. I have evidence. From his own records. Gideon's eyebrows went up. How'd you get that? You don't want to know. Gideon studied her for a long moment. Then he smiled slightly. You broke into his store. Eleanor didn't deny it. That's either the bravest or the stupidest thing I've ever heard, Gideon said. Probably both. Can you prove what he's been doing? Yes, but I need time to build the full case, and from what you're telling me, we don't have time. No, Gideon agreed. We don't. They stood in silence. What if we don't wait for the judge? Eleanor said slowly. What do you mean? What if we confront Hughes directly? All of us. Show him we know what he's been doing. Make him understand that if he doesn't make this right, we'll go to the territorial marshal ourselves. He won't make it right. He'll just dig in harder. Maybe. Or maybe he'll realize he's outnumbered. Eleanor picked up the laundry basket. How many families are still with us? 9, including yours. That's 9 ranchers and farmers who can testify against him. 9 families who can corroborate the theft. 9 sets of records that all point to the same pattern of fraud. Eleanor set the basket down again. That's not just gossip, Mr. Shaw. That's a conspiracy, and conspiracies get federal attention. Gideon's eyes narrowed. You want to threaten him? I want to give him a choice. Make it right or face federal prosecution. What if he calls our bluff? Then we follow through, Eleanor said simply. We take everything we have to the territorial marshal in Cheyenne. We file a formal complaint. We make enough noise that someone has to investigate. Gideon was quiet for a long moment. When? He asked finally. Tomorrow, before he can turn anyone else against us. Where? Eleanor thought about it. His store. In front of witnesses. Make it public. That's risky. Everything about this is risky. Gideon nodded slowly. Then he stuck out his hand. All right, Mrs. Boone, let's do it. Eleanor shook his hand. After Gideon left, Eleanor told Caleb what they'd planned. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. You're going to walk into Vernon Hughes's store, he said finally, in front of half the town, and accuse him of fraud. Yes. He's going to deny it. Probably. He might have you arrested for slander. He might try. Caleb rubbed his face with both hands. Eleanor, this is the only way, Eleanor finished. If we wait, he'll destroy us one by one. You know that. I know. Caleb looked at her. I don't want you getting hurt. I've already been hurt, kicked by a horse, remember? That's not funny. It's a little funny. Caleb didn't smile. What if this goes wrong? Then we lose everything, Eleanor said quietly. But we're going to lose everything anyway if we do nothing. At least this way we go down fighting. Caleb stared at her, at this woman who'd arrived in Black Hollow 2 months ago and turned his entire world upside down. You're terrifying, he said again. So you've mentioned. I mean it. Caleb crossed the room and took her hands. You're the strongest person I've ever met, and He paused. I'm grateful you're on my side. Eleanor squeezed his hands. Where else would I be? The next morning, 9 families rode into Black Hollow together. They arrived at noon when the town was busiest. Wagons lined up outside Hughes's general store, people climbing down, children staring, the whole town stopping to watch. Eleanor climbed down from Caleb's wagon and felt every eye in Black Hollow on her. Nora Whitmore was standing outside the mercantile. She nodded once. Eleanor nodded back. Then she walked into Hughes's store with Caleb on one side and Gideon Shaw on the other. The rest of the families followed. The store was crowded, at least a dozen customers scattered between the aisles. Vernon Hughes was behind the counter talking to a woman about fabric. He looked up when Eleanor walked in. His smile froze. Mrs. Boone, he said carefully. What a surprise. Mr. Hughes, Eleanor walked to the counter. We need to talk. I'm helping a customer at the moment. This won't take long. Hughes's eyes flicked to the families filing in behind her, to Gideon, to Caleb, back to Eleanor. Perhaps we should speak in my office, he said. No, Eleanor said. Here is fine. The woman at the counter grabbed her fabric and hurried toward the door. Hughes watched her go. Then he turned back to Eleanor. What is this about? He asked. Eleanor pulled out the papers she'd copied from his ledgers, set them on the counter. This is about $486, she said clearly, loud enough for everyone in the store to hear. Stolen from the families standing behind me over the last 3 years. The store went silent. Hughes didn't touch the papers. That's a serious accusation. Yes, it is. Do you have proof? Eleanor tapped the papers. Your own records, documenting every shorted order, every inflated bill, every fraudulent charge. Hughes's face went very still. I don't know where you got those papers, but they're forgeries. They're copies, Eleanor corrected, from the ledgers in your office. The ones where you tracked exactly how much you were stealing. That's slander. It's truth. Eleanor looked around the store, at the customers frozen in the aisles, at Ben standing white-faced behind the counter. And everyone here's going to hear it. Hughes's hands curled into fists. Get out of my store. Not until you make this right. There's nothing to make right. You're making baseless accusations. Baseless? Gideon stepped forward. I'm missing $43 worth of supplies I paid for. Want to explain that? I'm missing 52, another rancher called out. 68, said another. One by one, the families spoke up, calling out numbers, dates, specific orders that had come up short. Hughes's face was turning red. You're all mistaken. Poor record keeping. That's all this is. Then explain this. Eleanor pulled out another paper, the one with Ben's statement. Your clerk documented every fraudulent transaction. He's willing to testify. Ben made a small, strangled noise. Hughes spun toward him. Is that true? Ben's mouth opened, closed. He looked at Eleanor, at Hughes, at the floor. He started. Tell the truth, Ben, Eleanor said quietly. Please. Ben's hands were shaking. He told me to do it. Mr. Hughes, he told me to short the orders and charge full price. He said it was normal, that everyone did it. The store erupted. Customers started shouting, asking questions, demanding to see their own accounts. Hughes slammed his hand on the counter. Quiet! The noise died down. You're fired, Hughes said to Ben. No, he's not, Eleanor said. I beg your pardon? You're not firing him for telling the truth. Eleanor met Hughes's eyes. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to refund every dollar you stole. You're going to issue public apologies to every family you defrauded, and you're going to do it today. Hughes laughed. It was a cold, ugly sound. Or what? Or we take this to the territorial marshal in Cheyenne, Eleanor said. We file formal charges. We request a federal investigation, and we make sure everyone in Wyoming knows that Vernon Hughes is a thief. You have no authority to— We have evidence, Eleanor interrupted. We have witnesses. We have your own clerk's testimony. What do you have, Mr. Hughes? Denials? Hughes stared at her. The store was so quiet, Eleanor could hear her own heartbeat. You're bluffing, Hughes said finally. Try me. They locked eyes. The silence stretched. Then someone spoke from the back of the store. She's not bluffing. Everyone turned. Sheriff Dalton Reeves stood in the doorway. Eleanor's stomach dropped. Reeves walked forward slowly. He was a big man, mid-40s, with a weather-beaten face and eyes that missed nothing. Sheriff, Hughes said. Relief flooded his voice. Thank goodness you're here. This woman is making slanderous accusations. I heard the accusations, Reeves said. He stopped beside Eleanor and looked at the papers on the counter. Are those copies of Hughes's ledgers? Eleanor hesitated, then nodded. And they show systematic fraud? Yes. Reeves picked up the papers, read them slowly. His expression didn't change. Then he set them down and looked at Hughes. Vernon, he said quietly. Is this true? Hughes's face went white. Dalton, you can't possibly believe— Shaw, I asked you a question. It's a misunderstanding. Poor accounting. I can explain— Can you? Reeves crossed his arms. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been robbing half the county blind. I haven't— My brother's a rancher, Reeves continued. Lives about 20 miles south. He's been complaining for 2 years that his orders keep coming up short. I told him he was being careless. The sheriff's voice hardened. Turns out he wasn't careless. He was being robbed. Hughes took a step back. Dalton, Sheriff Reeves, Dalton corrected coldly. And you're going to make this right. Today. Or I'm writing to Cheyenne myself to file charges. The color drained from Hughes's face. You can't— Watch me. Hughes looked around the store, at the families staring at him, at the customers backing toward the door, at Ben, still standing behind the counter with tears on his face. He was cornered, and he knew it. How much? Hughes asked finally. His voice was barely audible. $486, Eleanor said, plus interest. I don't have that kind of cash on hand. Then you'll figure something out, Reeves said. You've got until sundown. Hughes's jaw worked. And if I pay it, this goes away? Eleanor glanced at the families behind her, at Gideon, at Caleb. If you pay it, and if you issue public apologies, and if you agree to be audited by an independent accountant, Eleanor said slowly, then we won't file charges. But if you ever try something like this again, we won't give you a second chance. Hughes stared at her with pure hatred. Fine, he spat. Say it louder, Reeves said, so everyone can hear. Hughes's hands curled into fists. Fine, I'll pay it. All of it. By sundown. The store erupted again, this time with cheers. Eleanor felt Caleb's hand on her shoulder. She turned and saw pride in his eyes. You did it, he said quietly. Eleanor looked at the families around them, at the customers who'd witnessed everything, at Ben, who was crying openly now. We did it, she corrected. By sundown, Vernon Hughes had paid back every stolen dollar. He did it in front of witnesses, counting out bills and coins onto the counter while Sheriff Reeves watched. His face was stone. His hands shook with rage. When it was done, he looked at Eleanor. This isn't over, he said quietly. Yes, it is, Eleanor said. Hughes's smile was cold. You think you've won, but you've made a powerful enemy, Mrs. Boone. I won't forget this. Neither will I, Eleanor said. She picked up her family's share of the money. Goodbye, Mr. Hughes. She walked out. The families celebrated in the street outside, shaking hands, clapping backs. Someone opened a bottle of whiskey and passed it around. Gideon found Eleanor and pulled her into a rough hug. "You did good," he said. "We all did." "No." Gideon pulled back and looked at her seriously. "You organized this. You found the evidence. You had the guts to stand up to him. The rest of us just followed your lead." Eleanor felt her throat tighten. "I couldn't have done it alone." "Maybe not, but you started it." Gideon smiled. "Black Hollow's lucky to have you, Mrs. Boone." The families stayed in town for another hour, talking and laughing and sharing the whiskey. Eleanor stood with Caleb and watched them. "What Hughes said," Caleb said quietly, "about making an enemy. He meant it." "I know. He's going to come after us." "Let him try." Eleanor leaned against Caleb's shoulder. "We beat him once. We can do it again." Caleb wrapped an arm around her. "You're not scared?" "Terrified," Eleanor admitted. "But I'm tired of being afraid. I'm tired of letting men like him win." Caleb kissed the top of her head. "What did I do to deserve you?" "You sent for a mail-order bride. Best decision I ever made." Eleanor smiled. But that night, lying in bed beside Caleb, she couldn't shake the look in Hughes's eyes. This isn't over. She believed him. The trouble started 2 weeks later. Eleanor was in town buying supplies when she overheard two women talking outside the dress shop. Disgraceful, if you ask me. "I heard she broke into his store. In the middle of the night." "That's criminal. And she calls him the thief." Eleanor froze. The women noticed her and fell silent. Then they gathered their skirts and hurried away. Eleanor stood there, heart pounding. Someone was spreading rumors. She heard more over the next few days, whispered conversations that stopped when she walked by. Sideways glances in the mercantile. People crossing the street to avoid her. The town that had celebrated her 2 weeks ago was turning against her again. Eleanor told Caleb that night. He listened with a deepening frown. "Hughes is behind this, obviously. Can we prove it?" "Not unless someone admits to being paid to gossip." Eleanor set down her fork. "He's smart. He can't fight us directly, so he's destroying my reputation instead. It won't work. People know what you did. They know you saved Mary Fisher." "People have short memories," Eleanor said quietly. "Especially when someone's whispering poison in their ears." Caleb's jaw tightened. "I'll talk to Reeves." "And say what? That people are gossiping about me? That's not illegal. There has to be something we can do." Eleanor didn't answer, because the truth was she didn't know. The rumors got worse. By the end of the week, Eleanor heard that she'd stolen from Hughes, that she'd seduced Sheriff Reeves to turn him against an honest businessman, that she'd threatened Ben into lying. None of it was true. All of it was spreading. Eleanor stopped going to town. It was easier than facing the stares and whispers. She threw herself into work instead, reorganizing the ranch accounts, planning for winter, helping with the barn reconstruction. But the isolation wore on her. One afternoon, Nora Whitmore showed up at the ranch. Eleanor was hanging laundry when Nora's wagon pulled into the yard. "Mrs. Whitmore," Eleanor said, surprised. "Mrs. Boone." Nora climbed down and walked over. "I heard you've been avoiding town." "I've been busy." "You've been hiding." Eleanor's hands tightened on the wet sheet she was holding. "I'm not hiding." "Yes, you are." Nora took the sheet from her and pinned it to the line. "And I don't blame you. The gossip's gotten ugly." "You've heard it?" "Everyone's heard it." Nora picked up another sheet. "Hughes is paying people to spread lies. Not much. $1 here, a free drink there. But enough to get tongues wagging." Eleanor felt sick. "How do you know?" "Because he offered me $5 to say you threatened me." Nora's mouth was a tight line. "I told him where he could put his $5. Eleanor almost laughed. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. I'm just doing what's right." Nora finished pinning the sheet. "The problem is not everyone's as stubborn as I am. Hughes is finding people who are willing to talk, and once enough people repeat a lie, it starts to sound like truth. What am I supposed to do?" "Fight back." "How?" Nora turned to face her. "Remember that little girl you saved, Mary Fisher?" "Of course. Her mother's organizing a social at the church next week. A thank you dinner for everyone who helped during the fire." Nora paused. "You're the guest of honor." Eleanor stared at her. "What?" Mary's mother wants to publicly thank you for saving her daughter's life, in front of the whole town. Nora smiled slightly. Hughes can spread all the rumors he wants, but he can't erase what you did, and he can't stop people from remembering. Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. I don't know what to say. Say you'll come. I will. Of course I will. Nora squeezed her hand. Good. Because Black Hollow needs to remember who you really are. And I think a public reminder is exactly what we need. The social was held on a Saturday evening. Eleanor wore her best dress, the same one she'd worn to her wedding, and let Caleb drive her into town. Her stomach was in knots the entire ride. What if no one comes? She said. They'll come. What if Hughes is there? Then we'll ignore him. What if... Eleanor. Caleb took her hand. Stop. You saved a child's life. You exposed a thief. You helped people get their money back. Whatever Hughes says, whatever lies he spreads, those things are true. And truth matters. Eleanor squeezed his hand. I hope you're right. When they arrived at the church, Eleanor's breath caught. The yard was full of people. 50, maybe 60 of them. Families she recognized and some she didn't. Tables set up with food, lanterns hanging from the trees, and in the middle of it all, Mary Fisher's mother, waving them over. Mrs. Boone, she called. Come, come, you're the guest of honor. Eleanor climbed down from the wagon and let herself be pulled into the crowd. Mary Fisher herself, small, blonde, gap-toothed, ran up and threw her arms around Eleanor's waist. Thank you for saving me, she said. Eleanor's throat closed up. She knelt down and hugged the girl back. You're welcome, sweetheart. The evening was a blur of faces and conversations and gratitude that made Eleanor uncomfortable and proud in equal measure. People thanked her, shook her hand, told her stories about how her actions had inspired them to check their own accounts with Hughes. One man, a farmer Eleanor had never met, said he'd found $32 worth of discrepancies and gotten his money back because of her. You changed things, he said, for all of us. Eleanor didn't know what to say to that. Halfway through the evening, Sheriff Reeves arrived. He found Eleanor standing near the food tables and pulled her aside. Mrs. Boone, he said, got a minute? Of course. Reeves glanced around, then he lowered his voice. I wanted you to know I've been investigating Hughes. Eleanor's heart skipped. And I found something. He's been working with railroad speculators, trying to buy up land along the proposed route for the new line coming through here. What does that have to do with the theft? Everything. Reeves's eyes were hard. He wasn't just stealing for profit. He was trying to drive ranchers into debt so they'd be forced to sell. Then he and his partners would buy the land cheap and resell it to the railroad at a huge markup. Eleanor felt cold. That's fraud, conspiracy, probably a few other charges. Reeves paused. I'm filing a formal complaint with the territorial marshal. This is bigger than just Black Hollow. This is organized crime. When? Monday. I wanted to tell you first. Reeves smiled slightly. You started this, Mrs. Boone. Thought you should know you were right. Eleanor felt dizzy. What happens to Hughes? If the marshal investigates and finds what I think he'll find, prison, and his partners go down with him. Eleanor nodded slowly. Thank you for believing us. Thank you for having the guts to speak up. Reeves tipped his hat. Enjoy your party. He walked away. Eleanor stood there, trying to process what she'd just heard. It was over. Really over. Hughes wasn't just defeated. He was going to be arrested. She found Caleb talking to Gideon and pulled him aside. What's wrong? Caleb asked immediately. Nothing's wrong. Eleanor smiled. Everything's right. She told him what Reeves had said. Caleb's eyes widened. Then he let out a whoop and picked Eleanor up and spun her around. People turned to stare. Eleanor laughed. When Caleb set her down, he was grinning. We did it. We did. Caleb kissed her, right there in front of everyone. Eleanor heard someone whistle, heard laughter, heard applause. When they broke apart, half the party was watching them. Caleb didn't seem to care. That's my wife, he announced to anyone listening. The smartest, bravest woman in Wyoming. Eleanor's face burned. Caleb, it's true. Caleb turned to face the crowd. 2 months ago, I was drowning. My ranch was failing. I was being robbed blind. I was about to lose everything. Then Eleanor showed up. And she didn't just save the ranch. She saved this whole town from a man who was systematically destroying us. People were nodding, murmuring agreement. So I just want everyone here to know, Caleb continued, that I'm the luckiest man alive, because I got to marry her. The crowd erupted in cheers. Eleanor felt tears on her cheeks. Caleb pulled her close and whispered in her ear, "I love you." "I love you too," Eleanor whispered back. The party lasted until midnight. When Eleanor and Caleb finally headed home, the stars were out and the prairie was quiet. Eleanor leaned against Caleb's shoulder and watched the horizon. "What are you thinking?" Caleb asked. "That 2 months ago I thought my life was over. And now? Now I think it's just beginning." Caleb kissed the top of her head. "Mine too." They rode the rest of the way in comfortable silence. When they reached the ranch, the rebuilt barn stood dark against the sky. The house lights were warm. Everything was quiet. Home. Eleanor had never had a real home before. Not like this. Not a place where she belonged, where she was wanted, where people knew her name and respected what she'd done. Caleb helped her down from the wagon, and they walked to the house hand in hand. Inside, Eleanor lit a lamp while Caleb stoked the fire. "I've been thinking," Caleb said as he added wood to the stove. "About what?" "About expanding, adding more cattle, maybe buying the land next to ours that's up for sale." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "Can we afford that?" "Not yet, but maybe next year, if we have a good season." Caleb straightened and looked at her. "I want to build something, Eleanor, not just survive, build. A real ranch, something we can be proud of." Eleanor crossed the room and took his hands. "We will." "You think so?" "I know so." Eleanor smiled. "We've beaten a drought, a fire, and a corrupt businessman. I think we can handle a few more cattle." Caleb laughed. Then he pulled her close and rested his forehead against hers. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For not giving up on me. On us. On this place." He paused. "For being exactly who you are." Eleanor's chest felt tight. "You're welcome." They stood there for a moment, just breathing together. Then Caleb led her to their bedroom, not separate rooms anymore, but one they shared, and closed the door behind them. Outside, the Wyoming wind howled across the prairie, but inside, Eleanor Boone felt nothing but warmth. Monday morning arrived with news that spread through Black Hollow faster than the fire had. Vernon Hughes was gone. Not arrested, not dragged away in chains, just gone. His store was locked up tight, the windows dark, and a hand-painted sign nailed to the door that read, "Closed until further notice." Eleanor heard about it from Tommy, who'd ridden into town at dawn to pick up nails and came back empty-handed and wide-eyed. "Place is deserted," Tommy said, breathless. "Hughes, Ben, everyone just vanished." Caleb and Eleanor exchanged a look. "When did this happen?" Caleb asked. "Sometime last night, I guess. Mrs. Whitmore said she saw a wagon leaving town around 3 in the morning. Thought it was strange, but didn't pay much mind until she saw the store this morning." Eleanor's stomach twisted. "Did Sheriff Reeves know?" "He's the one who told me to come tell you. Says he wants to talk to you both, today." They found Reeves at his office, standing behind his desk with a telegram in his hand and frustration written all over his face. "Hughes ran," he said before Eleanor could ask. "Got word somehow that I was filing charges, packed up, and left town in the middle of the night." "Where'd he go?" Caleb asked. "Don't know yet, but I've got men looking." Reeves set down the telegram. "The Territorial Marshal's office is sending an investigator. Should be here by the end of the week. They're taking this seriously." "Will they find him?" Eleanor asked. "Eventually. Men like Hughes always surface somewhere, usually when they think enough time has passed that people have forgotten." Reeves's mouth was a hard line. "But we won't forget, and when they catch him, he'll face charges. Federal charges." Eleanor nodded slowly. She should have felt relieved, victorious even. Instead, she felt hollow. "What about Ben?" she asked. "Did he leave too?" "No. Found him this morning at his mother's house, scared out of his mind. Thought we were coming to arrest him." Reeves paused. "I told him he's a witness, not a criminal. Long as he cooperates with the investigation, he's got nothing to worry about." "And the store?" "That's complicated. Technically, it's still Hughes's property, but he owes money to half the county, and the bank's already talking about foreclosure. Reeves shrugged. My guess is they'll auction it off, sell the building and the inventory to cover his debts. Caleb frowned. What happens to the town in the meantime? Hughes's store was the only place to buy supplies for 50 miles. I know, that's the problem. Reeves sat down heavily in his chair. We're going to have to figure something out. Fast. Eleanor was quiet on the ride home. Caleb kept glancing at her. You all right? I don't know, Eleanor said honestly. I thought I'd feel better, knowing he's gone. But you don't. No. Eleanor stared at the horizon. I keep thinking about what Reeves said, about the town needing a store, about all the people who depended on Hughes, even though he was robbing them blind. They'll manage. People always do. Will they? Eleanor turned to look at him. What happens when someone gets sick and needs medicine? Or when winter comes and they need supplies they can't get anywhere else? Hughes was a thief, but he was also the only option. Caleb was quiet for a moment. What are you thinking? Eleanor didn't answer right away. An idea was forming in her mind. Crazy. Impossible. The kind of idea that would have terrified her 3 months ago. Now it just made her heart race. What if we bought the store, she said. Caleb nearly drove the wagon off the road. What? The store. When the bank auctions it. What if we bought it? Eleanor, we don't have that kind of money. We have some, from selling the cattle. And we could get a loan, a real one, from a bank in Cheyenne, not from someone like Hughes. Caleb stared at her like she'd lost her mind. You want to run a general store? I want to give this town an honest option, Eleanor said. Someone who won't cheat them. Someone they can trust. She paused. And yes, I think I could run a store. You know how to keep books. That doesn't mean you know how to run a business. I can learn. Eleanor, Caleb, listen to me. Eleanor grabbed his arm. We proved we could stand up to Hughes. We proved we could organize people and fight back and win. Why stop there? Why not build something better? Caleb pulled the wagon to a stop. They were still a mile from the ranch, surrounded by nothing but prairie and sky. He turned to face her. You're serious about this, he said. Yes. Running a store is hard work, constant work. You'd be dealing with people all day, every day, inventory, accounts, difficult customers. I can handle it. I know you can. That's not what I'm worried about. Caleb's face was serious. I'm worried about the ranch, about us. We just started building something here, a real life, a real marriage. If you're in town running a store and I'm out here working the ranch, we'll make it work, Eleanor said. Other couples manage. We can too. Caleb searched her face. This is what you want? Eleanor thought about it, really thought about it. 3 months ago, she'd wanted nothing more than to survive, to find a place where she wouldn't be mocked or pitied or turned away. Now she wanted more than survival. She wanted to build, to create, to prove that a woman everyone had laughed at could do something that mattered. Yes, she said. This is what I want. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled. All right, he said. Let's buy a store. The bank auction was scheduled for 3 weeks later. In that time, Eleanor and Caleb rode to Cheyenne twice. Once to meet with a banker about a loan, once to meet with a lawyer about incorporation papers. The banker was skeptical at first. A woman running a business? A rancher's wife with no retail experience? But Eleanor brought her numbers, showed him the ranch account she'd reorganized, explained her plan for honest pricing, fair credit terms, and community trust. By the end of the meeting, the banker had approved a loan for $300. The lawyer was easier. He drew up the papers, filed them with the territory, and shook Eleanor's hand. Good luck, Mrs. Boone, he said. Wyoming needs more businesswomen like you. Back in Black Hollow, word spread fast about Eleanor's plans. Some people thought it was brilliant. Others thought it was foolish. A few thought it was downright scandalous for a married woman to run her own business. Eleanor ignored the gossip and focused on the work. She studied inventory lists, talked to other store owners in neighboring towns, made lists of suppliers, calculated costs and profit margins until her head hurt. Gideon Shaw stopped by the ranch one evening with advice. My wife ran a boarding house for 10 years before she passed, he said. Taught me a thing or two about business. First rule, Never extend credit to anyone who already owes you money. Second rule, trust your gut about people. Third rule, don't let anyone tell you you can't do something just because you're a woman. Eleanor smiled. I'll remember that. The day of the auction arrived cold and gray. Eleanor wore her blue dress and stood in the crowd outside the bank, with Caleb beside her and a sick feeling in her stomach. There were 7 other bidders, most of them speculators from out of town, men in nice suits who looked at the store building like it was just another investment. The auctioneer started the bidding at $200. One of the speculators immediately bid $250. Eleanor raised her hand. $300. The speculator glanced at her, then bid $350. Eleanor's heart sank. She only had $300 from the loan. She couldn't go higher. Then Gideon Shaw stepped forward. $400, he called out. Eleanor turned to stare at him. Gideon didn't look at her, just kept his eyes on the auctioneer. The speculator bid $450. Another voice called out from the back. $500. Eleanor turned. Nora Whitmore stood there with her arms crossed. What are you doing? Eleanor hissed. Investing, Nora said calmly. The bidding continued, back and forth, higher and higher. Eleanor watched in stunned silence as people she knew, people from the church social, people she'd helped get their money back from Hughes, people who'd watched her pull Mary Fisher from under that wagon, stepped forward and bid. Not for themselves. For her. The speculators dropped out one by one as the price climbed past $600. Finally, the auctioneer called out, $700? Going once, going twice. He slammed his gavel. Sold. To the Black Hollow Community Collective. Eleanor's knees went weak. Gideon turned to her with a grin. Congratulations, Mrs. Boone, you just became a store owner. I can't pay you all back. You're not paying us back, Nora said. We're investors. You make the store profitable. We get a percentage of the profits. You fail, we lose our investment. That's how business works. But why would you? Because you fought for us, Gideon said simply. Now we're fighting for you. Eleanor felt tears streaming down her face. Caleb pulled her into his arms. See? I told you people would help. Eleanor laughed through her tears. You didn't tell me they'd buy me a store. I didn't know they would. Eleanor pulled back and looked at the crowd of people who'd just pooled their money to give her a chance. Thank you, she said. Her voice broke. All of you, thank you. Don't thank us yet, Nora said. You've got a lot of work ahead of you. She was right. The store had been sitting empty for a month. Dust covered everything. The inventory was a mess. Some of it spoiled, some of it stolen, all of it poorly organized. Eleanor rolled up her sleeves and got to work. She spent 2 weeks cleaning, scrubbing floors, washing windows, sorting through inventory and making lists of what could be sold and what needed to be thrown out. Caleb helped when he could. So did Walter. So did half the women in town, who showed up with buckets and rags and opinions about where things should go. Eleanor reorganized everything, put the most needed items at eye level, created a system for tracking inventory, set up a simple but clear pricing structure. And she hired Ben. He showed up at the store 3 days before the opening, hat in his hands, looking terrified. Mrs. Boone, he said, I heard you were hiring. I know I don't deserve after what I did, but I was hoping. You're hired, Eleanor said. Ben blinked. What? I need someone who knows the inventory and the customers, someone who can keep books and handle transactions. You know how to do all that. But I helped Hughes steal from you. You also helped us stop him, Eleanor said. Everyone makes mistakes, Ben. What matters is what you do after. Ben's eyes filled with tears. Thank you. Don't thank me. Just show up on time and do honest work. I will. I swear I will. The store opened on a Saturday morning in late September. Eleanor stood behind the counter at dawn with her heart hammering and her hands shaking. What if no one came? What if they'd all helped her buy the store but didn't actually want to shop there? What if she'd made a terrible mistake? Then the door opened. Mary Fisher's mother walked in with a shopping list and a smile. Good morning, Mrs. Boone, she said. I need flour and sugar, and my husband wants tobacco. Eleanor let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Of course, she said. Right this way. By noon, the store was packed. People came to browse, to buy, to see what Eleanor had done with the place. They stayed to talk, to gossip. to share news. The store became more than just a place to buy supplies. It became a gathering place, a community center, somewhere people could come and feel welcome. Eleanor worked from dawn until dark that first week. Her feet ached, her back ached. She fell into bed every night too exhausted to speak. But she'd never been happier, Caleb noticed. "You're glowing," he said one night as they lay in bed. "I'm sweating. There's a difference." "No, I mean it. You look—" He paused, searching for the word. "Alive. More alive than I've ever seen you." Eleanor turned to look at him. "Is that a problem?" "No, it's wonderful." Caleb brushed a strand of hair from her face. "I was worried the store would take you away from me. But instead it's like you found the part of yourself that was missing." Eleanor thought about that. About the girl she'd been in Philadelphia. Invisible. Unwanted. Trying to make herself smaller so the world wouldn't notice her. And about the woman she'd become. The woman who ran a store and managed accounts and stood up to men who tried to cheat her. "I did find something," Eleanor said quietly. "I found out I'm capable of more than I thought. I could have told you that." "I know, but I had to figure it out for myself." Caleb kissed her forehead. "I'm proud of you." "I'm proud of us," Eleanor corrected. "The ranch is doing better too. You rebuilt the barn. You're planning to expand. We're both building something." "Together," Caleb said. "Together," Eleanor agreed. October arrived with cooler weather and the news everyone had been waiting for. Vernon Hughes had been arrested in Denver. Sheriff Reeves brought the telegram to the store himself. "Got him," he said, grinning. "Tried to set up shop in Colorado under a fake name. Someone recognized him and tipped off the marshal." Eleanor set down the inventory list she'd been working on. "What happens now?" "He'll be extradited back to Wyoming. Face trial for fraud, conspiracy, and about a dozen other charges." Reeves paused. "The territorial judge wants to talk to you. And the other families. Get your testimony on record." "When?" "He'll be here next week." Eleanor nodded slowly. "We'll be ready." The judge arrived on a Tuesday. His name was Marcus Pemberton, and he was nothing like Eleanor expected. Not old and stern, but middle-aged and sharp-eyed, with a reputation for fairness that preceded him. He held court in the church, since it was the only building in Black Hollow big enough to hold everyone. Eleanor testified first. She walked through everything. The missing inventory, the inflated bills, the evidence she'd found in Hughes's own ledgers, the $486 stolen from 11 families. Judge Pemberton listened without interrupting. When she finished, he asked only one question. "Mrs. Boone, what made you decide to investigate Mr. Hughes in the first place?" Eleanor thought about it. "Because I was tired of feeling powerless," she said finally. "I'd spent my whole life watching people take advantage of others. Watching bad men get away with things because nobody had the courage to stop them. And I decided—" She paused. "I decided I wasn't going to be one of the people who just watched anymore." Judge Pemberton nodded. "Thank you, Mrs. Boone. That will be all." The other families testified after her. One by one, they told their stories. The money they'd lost. The hardships they'd endured. The relief they'd felt when Eleanor organized them to fight back. When the last testimony was finished, Judge Pemberton stood. "I've heard enough," he said. "When Mr. Hughes stands trial, I will personally recommend the harshest possible sentence. This was not simply theft. This was a systematic assault on an entire community, and it will not be tolerated in my territory." The church erupted in applause. Eleanor sat in the back row beside Caleb and let the noise wash over her. It was over. Really, truly over. Hughes would face justice. The town would recover. And Eleanor had proven she was more than the woman everyone had mocked. After the hearing, people lingered in the churchyard, talking, celebrating. Judge Pemberton found Eleanor before he left. "Mrs. Boone," he said, "might I have a word?" "Of course." He led her away from the crowd. When they were alone, he turned to face her. "I've been a judge for 20 years, he said. "I've seen a lot of cases, a lot of criminals, but I've rarely seen someone do what you did. Organize a community, build a case, stand up to a powerful man with nothing but intelligence and courage." Eleanor didn't know what to say. "I just did what needed to be done." "Most people don't," Pemberton said. Most people look the other way. Let someone else handle it, but not you." He paused. "Have you ever considered studying law?" Eleanor blinked. "Law? You have a sharp legal mind. The way you organize that evidence, the clarity of your testimony, you'd make an excellent lawyer." I'm not educated. I didn't go to university. Neither did Abraham Lincoln. He read law on his own and passed the bar. Pemberton pulled a card from his pocket and handed it to her. "If you're interested, I know several attorneys in Cheyenne who take on apprentices. Women, even. It's not common, but it's not unheard of." Eleanor stared at the card. "You don't have to decide now," Pemberton said. "But think about it. Wyoming's going to need good lawyers, honest ones, people who actually care about justice." He smiled. "People like you." He tipped his hat and walked away. Eleanor stood there holding the card, her mind racing. A lawyer. She'd never even considered it. But now that the idea was there, she couldn't stop thinking about it. That night, she showed the card to Caleb. He read it twice. Then he looked at her. "Do you want to do it?" he asked. "I don't know," Eleanor said honestly. "Part of me does. Part of me thinks it's crazy." "Which part is louder?" Eleanor smiled. "The part that thinks I can do it." "Then you should try." "But what about the store? The ranch? Us?" Caleb took her hands. "Eleanor, I married you because you're brilliant and stubborn, and you don't give up on things that matter. If you want to study law, you'll figure out how to make it work. You always do. It would take years." "So what? We've got years." Eleanor looked at him, at this man who'd been terrified of her strength when she first arrived, who'd learned to celebrate it instead. "You really wouldn't mind?" she asked. "Mind? I'd be proud." Caleb kissed her. Besides, having a lawyer in the family could come in handy. Eleanor laughed. The autumn social was held in late October, when the aspens turned gold and the air smelled like wood smoke and coming snow. It was the biggest event Black Hollow held all year. A dance in the church hall, with fiddle music and food, and everyone dressed in their best. 3 months ago, Eleanor would never have attended something like this, would never have let herself be the center of attention, would never have believed she belonged in a room full of people who once mocked her. But tonight was different. Tonight, Caleb took her hand in the middle of the crowded hall and led her to the dance floor. Eleanor hesitated. "I'm not a very good dancer." "Neither am I," Caleb said. "But I don't care." He pulled her close and they swayed to the music. Around them, other couples danced. Children ran between the tables. Old men sat in corners and argued about cattle prices. And Eleanor realized something. She belonged here. Not because the town had finally accepted her, but because she'd accepted herself. She was tall, she was broad-shouldered, she was smarter than most men gave her credit for. She'd survived mockery and prejudice and a horse kick that should have killed her. And she'd built something out of all of it. A marriage, a business, a future. "What are you thinking about?" Caleb asked. Eleanor looked up at him, at this man who'd frozen when she stepped off the stagecoach, who'd learned to stand beside her instead of in front of her. "I'm thinking about that first day," she said, "when I arrived, when everyone laughed." Caleb's face darkened. "I'm sorry I didn't—" "Don't apologize. I'm not angry anymore." Eleanor smiled. "I'm grateful. Grateful. If this town had welcomed me with open arms, I might have stayed quiet, stayed small, tried to fit in." She paused. "But because they rejected me, I had to fight. And fighting made me stronger." Caleb pulled her closer. "You were always strong. You just didn't know it yet." "Maybe, but I know it now." They danced in silence for a moment. Then Caleb said, "I need to tell you something." Eleanor pulled back slightly. "What?" "When I sent for a mail-order bride, I thought I needed someone to help me survive. Someone to keep the books, and cook the meals, and make life a little less hard." He paused. "I thought I was looking for a helper." "And what did you get?" "A partner," Caleb said. "Someone who didn't just help me survive. Someone who taught me how to actually live." Eleanor felt tears sting her eyes. "I was drowning before you came," Caleb continued. "Not just financially, emotionally. I'd locked myself away after my first wife died. Stopped feeling, stopped hoping, just worked until I was too tired to think." He cupped her face. You changed that. You made me remember what it feels like to want something more than just making it through another day. Caleb, I love you, he said, not because you saved the ranch, not because you're smart or brave or any of those things. I love you because you make me want to be better, to do better, to build something that matters. Eleanor kissed him. The music played on, people danced, the night wore on. And in the middle of it all, Eleanor Boone, once mocked, once invisible, once told she was too much, finally felt like she was exactly enough. 6 months later, Eleanor received her first letter from Judge Pemberton's colleague in Cheyenne, an attorney named Sarah Caldwell, who was willing to take on a female apprentice. Eleanor read the letter 3 times. Then she showed it to Caleb. When would you start? He asked. She wants me to come to Cheyenne for a few months, study with her. Then I can continue reading law on my own and come back for examinations. A few months is a long time. I know. Eleanor looked at him. Is it too long? Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled. No, he said. We'll make it work. Walter can help with the ranch. Ben can run the store. And I'll come visit you in Cheyenne when I can. You're sure? I'm sure. Caleb pulled her close. Go learn how to be a lawyer, Eleanor. The territory needs you. Eleanor left for Cheyenne in early spring. The day she boarded the stage, half of Black Hollow came to see her off. Nora Whitmore hugged her. Don't forget us. I couldn't if I tried, Eleanor said. Gideon Shaw shook her hand. Make us proud. I will. Mary Fisher handed her a drawing she'd made. Come back soon. Eleanor knelt down and hugged the little girl. I promise. Caleb walked her to the stage and helped her with her trunk. I'm going to miss you, he said. I'm going to miss you too. Write to me? Every week. They kissed, long and deep and full of promises. Then Eleanor climbed into the stage. As it pulled away, she looked back at the town that had once laughed at her, at the people who'd become her friends, her investors, her community, at the husband who'd learned to love her not despite her strength, but because of it. And she realized something. She'd come to Black Hollow looking for a place to disappear. Instead, she'd found a place to become exactly who she was meant to be. The stage rolled on. The prairie stretched out ahead, and Eleanor Boone smiled. Because her story wasn't ending, it was just beginning. Eleanor returned to Black Hollow 18 months later with a law degree and a reputation. The town threw a celebration that lasted 3 days. She opened a law office above the general store, started taking cases, helped families with land disputes, contract negotiations, and fraud claims. She won more than she lost. And when Wyoming became a state in 1890, Eleanor Boone became one of the first women in America to argue a case before a state Supreme Court. She won that too. Years later, when people asked her how she'd done it, how she'd gone from mail-order bride to respected attorney, Eleanor always gave the same answer. I stopped waiting for permission to be who I was, she'd say, and I started fighting for what I deserved. But privately, when it was just her and Caleb sitting on their porch watching the sunset over the ranch they'd built together, Eleanor would tell a different truth. I was scared every single day, she'd admit. Scared I'd fail. Scared I wasn't good enough. Scared the world would prove right, all the people who'd laughed at me. But you did it anyway, Caleb would say. I did it anyway, Eleanor would agree, because that, she'd learned, was the real secret. Courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was deciding that what you wanted mattered more than what you feared. And Eleanor Boone had learned to want a lot. A real marriage, a successful business, a career that challenged her, respect, justice, a life that was hers on her own terms. She didn't get all of it perfectly. Some days were harder than others. Some battles she lost. Some people still whispered that a woman had no business doing what she did. But Eleanor had stopped listening to those whispers long ago. She'd learned something more important, that she didn't need the whole world to believe in her. She just needed to believe in herself. And on a dusty August day in 1874, when she'd stepped off that stagecoach into a town full of mockery, that belief had been planted. It had grown slowly, through fire and theft and heartbreak and triumph. But it had grown. And in the end, it had been enough. More than enough. It had been everything.